this is like one of those flagpole type scenarios. One way I like to highlight why, yeah, you do have the right to defend your rope or your flagpole, and why you don't have a right to grab onto it morally or otherwise, is imagine if instead, I'm just standing by a cliff with my giant swinging rock over the edge, and then you stumble and fall, and you grab onto my cock, and it's like, let go of my cock, you're gonna rip it off or something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be perfectly within my rights to, like, start swinging it and get you off of there, you know? You
Right,
don't
right,
have a
right.
right to be grabbing my cock on your way up.
Theoretically, Newtonian physics is the domain under which these elements are at play, and and for and those elements are always at play from damn near everything we can see with a telescope and everything that happens on Earth. So the fact that something else was added doesn't necessarily debunk Newtonian physics, because
Mhm.
Newtonian physics, unbeknownst to the those working under that framework for so long, was calculating under a specific domain that includes gravity existing and having a play in within a field of space.
Yeah. That is
Okay.
that you've hit it on the nail on the head of the nail there. These further conclusions, they don't invalidate the earlier conclusions in Newtonian mechanics.
But yeah, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I've been in and out of the. I had some medical stuff and the move and everything, but I'm back. I'm happy to be back. Happy to get some things done, and so I had this burning kind of question. I wanted to talk to somebody that's more of a theory nerd than I am, right? Because I mean, I'm okay. I'm better than your typical person on Twitter that calls themselves an ANCAP, but like when we get into the nitty gritty of like, mapping out shit with person, A did thing to B to C to X, I'm like, bro, I need a real nerd. All right. I'm like, I'm not good enough.
You came to
And,
the right place.
yeah. And so and so Liquid Zulu, guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely follow his channel. I mean, the hair really says it all, right? Like all great thinkers throughout history, they've had crazy fucking hair. And most of you don't know, George Washington himself was a redhead. You only see pictures of him in his white wig, but based liberty always comes in the form of crazy giant red hair. Great stuff. Also that recent short you did, I love that. Do you have an editor or do you do all your editing yourself?
Myself.
You've gotten a lot better over the last like year or two. I've noticed like some of your videos are
Thank
like
you.
really well edited.
I appreciate
So
it.
definitely check them out, especially if you're a hardcore libertarian nerd or you want to be one. And so that's why I hit you up, because I was like, who better to ask about this than you? And so there was like this random Twitter interaction about booby traps, and I gave my opinion. You gave me a clearer formulation of my own opinion, and I was like, oh man, I've got to talk to him. And I think the reason is like I think we all understand self-defense is like an important aspect to the non-aggression principle. No, maybe not to the non-aggression. That's the wrong way to put it. To formulating a cohesive society that can follow the non-aggression principle, right? Like you can be a pacifist and follow the non-aggression principle. But if everyone is a pacifist, kind of in that Jack London style, it only takes one person to pick up the stick that, communicates the universal or else what. And so there needs to
Yeah.
be that, or else I'll do this. Right. And so I've noticed that formulating this, there's a couple of like, it's obvious at first, but then when you get to the limit cases, it starts to get really murky, and I struggle. Namely, when it comes to the concept of war, when it comes to the concept of booby traps, and when it comes to the concept of like many people intuit like a kind of departurist gentleness principle that comes along with like self-defense, but the logic, and I intuit that, right? Like I intuit that you shouldn't blast grandma for accidentally walking in your front yard. But like I also like the logic of that kind of seems like people are just like, well, I feel it, so like therefore it's true. And so they just go, obviously you don't blast grandma. And when you ask the question, well, why? They just go, what are you, a fucking psychopath? And it's like, maybe I am. Answer the question in logic so that we can actually formulate. Because like I don't like the idea of leaving it up towards, well, I feel that's the right, my moral preferences are you shouldn't blast grandma. Like I feel there has to be a right answer as to why. And so I was like, I've got to hit you up. And so those are kind of my three burning questions. And the reason I ask you is when does self-defense go too far? How can a libertarian society, such that it is, obviously we want to look at it at an individual level, but voluntary contract of like a military organization to defend their territory, a covenant community, etc. How can they wage war meaningfully whilst not violating the non-aggression principle? And then booby traps, which I thought was just like an interesting, fun one. And those are my three yearning questions that I had for the True Nerd. Please, I don't know where to go from here other than those are my three questions. Like, let's talk about it. And also, please tell everybody how amazing you are, because you are.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I am indeed amazing. This is correct. I've basically the theory that I'm basing this on here. It's derived mostly from Chris Bohrer. He has a good paper called "The Human Body Sword," and I referenced that to develop the theory in my course. You can read the thing for free on my website liquidzoo.github.io. It's the lesson on defensive force and proportionality, I believe the name is. So basically, like
you said, human body sword, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's basically he like inverts like the common, like, what if you got a human shield, and he inverts that. What if I pick you up and start swinging you around like a sword? And that's how
like a berserker barbarian from Baldur's Gate 3. Like how do we handle that? Okay.
Yeah. So like the fundamental starting point for the theory of defense, it's unlike the theory of punishment. The theory of punishment, we base that in like estoppel, which is how you get to like retribution being fine. So if you punch me in the face, I would, as a punishment against you, I would be allowed to, once the whole thing's said and done, we're in court, we got to punish you now. I'd be allowed to punch you back. Defense is a little different.
This is removed from the immediate threat or danger. Right. So the estoppel principle is there is no longer any reasonable threat to me, which of course is subjective. But I think we would both probably argue that like what that means to a society is kind of like intersubjective upon the norms of the society. What no longer constitute a threat in terms of like whatever reasonable authority has captured them, or like whatever the communities decide these two have isolated themselves, whatever that is.
Well, I definitely wouldn't describe it as intersubjective because I'm, again, autistic. I would describe it as objective. But yes, that's because I'm autistic, so I would describe it as objective. So I would say you can like objectively determine whether or not there's a threat going on. You can look at all the available evidence and whatnot. That's just an aside. You basically, it's a terminological thing.
Okay, yeah. I don't know. I'm not full blown. I'm not a full blown objectivist. So like, there are some things that we're going to disagree on there, but hopefully if we can both agree to that these two things are different, then we don't need to get into the weeds of that specific quibble.
Yeah. So the way I come to the proper theory of defense is I go back to Anthony Deyassé. He has this good formulation of property where he describes property as exclusion. So his sort of NEP formulation is let exclusion stand. If you're excluding
if you're incapable of excluding someone, then it's not really your property.
So that's how we get
at least morally or morally, right? Like people could invade your property and you could be physically incapable of doing so. Like in reality, but like it's still your property. You still have a right to exclusion, and therefore that right to exclusion is probably the most accurate definition of what is and isn't property. If you don't have a right to exclude, then it's probably not your property.
Yeah, and even if they were able to overcome your exclusion, you might have still been trying to exclude people. Like you might have erected a fence and then they just rammed it down. It doesn't say that you are necessarily successful in that exclusion. It's just you were trying to exclude people. So that is where I base defense theory on. It's I have a property in something, so therefore I'm allowed to exclude people from that thing. And this would involve, if they're trying to invade it, I'd be allowed to stop them from invading it. Right? This is what it means to defend your property.
Mhm.
And from this, we can get to the gentleness principle. And I mean, I agree with you that basically every previous formulation of the gentleness principle has been, well, it just feels right,
Mhm.
they'll dress up in all sorts of
Ray,
fancy
have you
terms.
solved this problem without me knowing?
I reckon I've solved it.
That's why this is why I was like, I gotta talk to Liquid Zula.
Yeah, so I can give like an example of some
Uh-huh.
guy, he's walking onto your garden and he just because he wants to admire your roses. I'll do it in stages. So first of all, he's going onto your garden and he doesn't know that it's your garden, right? And then you just say, "Hey, fuck off, guy! This is my property." And then he's like, "Oh right, sorry, I didn't realize." And then he fucks off. So in that
Mhm.
situation, all that's required to exclude him is for you to say, "Hey, fuck off," right? And this is the principle. You're allowed to defend to the extent that is required to exclude people from your property. So
Where
here,
do we
you
where do we
wouldn't.
derive that from? I mean, I want you to I want you to continue because I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I've heard that answer before, like you're allowed to do the extent, but then my problem is, and I'm sure you've answered this, right? Is that like, well, then this becomes like an imposition on the defender or on the private property owner, right? That they must take the path of least resistance in some regard. And by taking a path with more resistance, they now become an aggressor. But 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 they don't know necessarily what the path of least resistance is. So it becomes a crippling thing that makes me incapable of actually excluding individuals from my property because I don't know what is and isn't aggression.
Sure. So this is why again I would tie it back to the objectivist epistemology,
Mm-hmm.
because I think you can achieve certainty on if all the evidence is pointing towards, well, you didn't have to rocket launcher that baby to get him off. You could have just picked him up and moved him, because with that, we understand that's how babies work. Generally, they aren't
Mm-hmm.
like eldritch gods who will just smite you into oblivion for trying to touch them. Um, so yeah, I would say that there is a possibility for certainty there, and if the people watching, because this is like maybe a tangent, we might get back to this, but there is a lecture
Mm-hmm.
called "The Failure of Cartesian Doubt" by Leonard Peikoff. It's in his History of Philosophy series. You can just watch it on YouTube.
I got like halfway through his series and like he's such a little cunt the entire time that it's difficult to listen to him because he goes on these like 5-minute tangents about why some leftist, why some German philosopher is like the worst person to ever exist in the history of the world, and then he gives you like 20 minutes of great stuff, and then he gets to the next German philosopher, and then it's just like, dude, shut up, just tell me the right answer.
I mean, I love that stuff. I love it. But yeah, circling back around to the point is, we can
Failure
imagine maybe this,
of
maybe
Cartesian
sorry,
epistemology.
failure of I can pull it up or something.
Cartesian epistemology, I thought is what you said.
Cartesian doubt is
Oh,
the
doubt.
word. You can probably just search up Cartesian doubt Leonard Peikoff and it'll come up.
Okay,
But
thank you.
yeah, so um, we could then say there's some sort of scenario where the guy doesn't leave from just you saying, "Hey, fuck off," and maybe he's a little more stubborn. You have to grab him by the arm and literally lead him off. So leading him off by grabbing his arm, that we can posit that is required to exclude him. But then if you took out your needle and started stabbing at his arm, just for fun or something, this is not included in trying to exclude him from your property. It's not required. It's not a necessary step in excluding him. So because he's allowed to exclude you from his body, right? He still owns his body. You're only allowed to possess his body to the degree that is required to actually exclude him from
So
your
hold on.
property.
To
But
to
the needle
simple to
punching
put
isn't
this in
required for
to
this.
put this to put this in stupid people terms, right? What you're saying is that if you actually formulate and understand property, not as like this sovereign thing that you own that you can do anything with, but instead something that you have the right to exclude others from solely from using, then your defense of your property should also best be defined in the same by the same way, which is that
Mhm.
what does it take to exclude someone from your property? And if you are doing actions that are not the at least the best course of action towards exclusion, but you're doing something that isn't necessary or helpful in exclusion, then you're being an aggressor, and the person
Mhm.
just happens to be on your property or utilizing
Yeah.
your property in some regard. I
Yeah.
get that, but then again, and I'm sure you'll get to it. It still gets to the problem of like, well, how do I know as the property owner what is and isn't necessary for exclusion?
So yeah, this is how you could have like sort of um, a ramping up sort of thing, because
Mhm,
generally when people are aggressing against you, it's not in fact required that you hit the nuclear launch button, right?
mhm.
So we understand what general aggressions go on. We have evidence for this. So you begin low down because in almost all cases, you'd start low down, right? And that's fine enough. But then you might need to ramp up as the evidence is mounting that, hey, this guy's a little more dangerous, like, this would obviously be different if the guy was like chasing you with an axe, right? And he had murder in his eyes. Like it's clear that, hey, I might need to shoot at this guy, right? The evidence is
Right.
pointing towards shooting at him is fine, right? In that situation. So that's where this links back to the epistemology, because that is definitely an epistemic question. That's like
Mhm.
before law, is like how do you have evidence for what beliefs can count as true or justified and things like that. That would
Would
be
you
the
say
epistemology.
would you say that an individual that is incapable of properly assessing um, the appropriate rules of engagement for exclusion is therefore not competent to be a property owner?
Yes. So this is actually something I formulated with respect to animal rights.
Hmm.
Is you know what are the criteria which you need to meet to actually have rights? And there are basically two of them. Um, that you have to be able to act. You actually have to be able to, engage in purposeful behavior,
Right.
because
You
conflicts
can't be an
are,
amoeba, right? You can't just
yeah,
be like wondrously drifting because you can't cause conflict because you're not an
yeah,
entity. You're not an entity even capable of the conception of conflict.
yeah. So the reason for that is because it's not always clear, because a lot of people have bad definitions of the IP. But what aggression means is mutually exclusive actions. So if I can't act, then I couldn't ever have conflicts. So I'm irrelevant for entities that could have conflicts. So
Yeah,
that's
I
criteria
can't
one.
steal if Robin is brain dead and will forever remain brain dead and is a species of creature that is always born brain dead, then Crusoe can't steal Robin's stick because Robin can't own a fucking stick. He's just an
Mhm.
amoeba that happens to be on that half of the island, and Crusoe can go onto that half of the island whenever the fuck he wants, regardless of Robin's vegetative state holding a stick currently.
Yeah, and we see this in the case of people who are like corpses, right? We
Mm-hmm.
know that corpses don't get up and start acting again, right? There isn't like a zombie virus going around. So yeah, they are property, right? Or at least they're open to be property.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the first criterion, is they have to actually be able to act. And then the second criterion is they have to be able to avoid conflicts. So me and you, for there to be law between us, and in the natural law sense,
Mm-hmm.
we both have to be able to avoid conflicts with each other, which means we have to be able to in some way communicate. And this is how you would deal with the instance of like an alien race, which might be acting, but maybe they're like vampires or something. In order to live, they have to eat humans, right? We could never avoid conflicts with this race, so there would be no meaning of law between us.
Or
I can't remember what
for a
exactly
different
exists.
type of nerd, until Kerrigan exists, the Zerg are not deserving of rights, right?
I'm sorry, I don't watch. I don't play that game, so I don't get the
StarCraft. I
reference.
think you're just a little too young for StarCraft. Like
Yeah,
StarCraft Two
probably.
was a huge thing in like the mid 2000s.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like really big in Korea still. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's just because it's one of those RTS games, and Koreans are insanely good at them.
because I think it was like really easy to pirate or something. So all the Korean kids, when they're getting internet, they all pirated
Maybe.
StarCraft.
Okay,
Um,
so the concept here is in order to have rights, you have to be able to communicate with another individual,
mhm,
and it needs to be some form of meaningful communication. But it doesn't necessarily you don't necessarily both need to speak English or anything. You just need to be able to be like stop, this is mine. Like
yeah,
there are forms of very basic communication, but that communication if we're again using this framework that property is that which you have the right to exclude other individuals from or anything from, right? Exclusive control in terms of exclusion. Then all you need to be able to do is communicate what is necessary to exclude. Like stop. Okay, they don't stop. Okay, you gently push them. Like, you can be seeing bobbly blah 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 blah, but like it's obvious. Like, hey, this is mine. Get away, and then violence ensues.
Yeah, like, I mean, if I go to like France, like I don't speak French,
Mhm.
like I speak a tiny little bit, but I can still go, oh, that's a person's property there. I can recognize that this is a person's property. I can see that this is where the lawn starts, and they've got a fence around it.
Right.
Like I can
There's
still
the whole
recognize.
embordering thing, right? Like, which I think
Mhm.
is very obvious form of communication of property. But yeah.
So
Okay,
yeah, that
so
would be. Sorry, I'll let you go.
we've established what I think conservatives in our current legal system would call reasonable, right? Like we've established a reasonable metric of rules of engagement to exclude someone off of property, and I'm fine with that, right? It makes sense. I intuit it as it making sense, but again, my problem is why are we? Like it seems like we're working like post hoc, right? In terms of like rules of engagement is a very common thing. We all kind of recognize it as an important thing. And so it seems like we're going backwards and saying, well, this is the appropriate measure to remove someone from the property. But like and I'm not trying to be autistic, right? But but I am a little here because it's important and I got you here. Like, but why? How does the person know what is or isn't the right means of exclusion? They're kind of just guessing based off of the available evidence and coming to the best conclusion that they can as to what it is. But the problem that I have with that is some people are smarter than others, and some people's guesses are better than others. And all of a sudden, once we start realizing that, we begin to realize that it really becomes a metric of the individual, a responsibility, a moral imposition that we place on the property owner to have a certain subset of knowledge as to what is and isn't appropriate. And even that can be wrong because they're lacking evidence in that scenario. Like they don't know that grandma is actually just waiting for you to get close to lightly move her because grandma's got a fucking poison dagger up her sleeve.
So yeah, this is why I brought up Cartesian doubt. Is
Mm-hmm.
basically the method of Cartesian doubt is, it's Descartes. It's well, I think these things are true, but what if I'm wrong? I might have made an error somewhere, so that's got to go. And he keeps breaking everything down, and this is how he gets to cogito ergo sum. It's like that he thinks that somehow gets out of it, but it still doesn't. Because what if he was deceived into thinking that
Well,
contradictions are false? Um,
oh,
so
yeah. I thought you were going to say deceived. I was like, he brings up the idea of the, what is it called? The evil demon or the evil, I can't remember the exact term he used, but he uses like,
Descartes,
even if I'm, yeah, Descartes, before the matrix is ever a concept, he's like, even if I'm in the matrix, there's still an entity that is in the matrix. So I do think that I don't know. I mean, I think that was still at least for its time, a revolutionary insight because I mean, he's kind of stumbling across the law of identity.
I would say he doesn't do that. And later Cartesians, they were happy to
Yeah.
go, oh, well, what if I doubt the law of non contradiction? Well, then suddenly I can throw out this whole cogito ergo something, and then, we have no knowledge, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is the more consistent view. Is if you say, well, I might have made some error here in this argument, so I can't be sure about it. I can't achieve certainty in anything. That is the consistent view. So, what is wrong with this view of, well, I might have made an error here somewhere? Or if you're making an argument, I go, well, you can't say that with certainty because you might have made an error. It's that the burden of proof is fundamentally, it's on me. It's on me to show that there is an error there. It's not, well, you might have made an error. That's a completely non-specific claim. It's epistemologically null. It doesn't actually do anything. Yes, man has the capacity to make errors, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean he is in fact making an error here. It's conflating a potential with an actual, right? It's saying, well, you could make some sort of error here. So therefore, you've got to discard the whole thing. This is not how anything's done. Like,
doesn't this place an imposition though on the private property owner? We recognize that man can make error, right? Now, from a legal perspective, I totally understand what you're saying, right? Which is, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, please do. But from a legal perspective, from an ethical, natural law perspective, setting moral goods aside, right? Like what is justified here? I totally understand the concept of like, just because he can err doesn't mean we permit him to do anything, right? Just because it is possible grandma has a poison dagger doesn't mean that we use that doubt as a means to make it permissible to, immediately like set forward like to wax the fucking sidewalk so that people accidentally slip into like the yard and then like immediately murder them, or kill them. You would just say not even to go there, right? I recognize that doubt isn't an excuse in that regard. My issue is, well, no. Actually, I don't think there's an issue there. I get that. I have issue with the idea that he could lack certainty because he obviously literally lacks certainty. He can't be, no one can ever be certain that the grandma doesn't have a poison dagger. We just use the best available evidence to make the most rational decision at the time.
well, I would say if you are using the best available evidence and making, you're not making any errors in your logic from your deduction from this evidence, then you can be certain. This is why the objectivist view of certainty is so powerful.
That doesn't make sense.
I can be certain that the sky is blue. I see it. It's blue. I can go ahead.
You can't be certain that grandma has a poison dagger or not when she stumbles into your yard.
Well, you'd have to look at all the evidence. Like, yes, it might be the case that you were wrong and she did indeed have a poison dagger, but that you were wrong, that you made some sort of error, that you were incorrect, that doesn't prove that, then you can never be certain about anything.
No, it just proves that it proves that there are things of which you cannot be certain about. Which, this is one, at least one, right? There is at least one, and that one is whether or not grandma has a poison dagger. And if there is at least one, there are potentially more. And I'm sure we could come up with more scenarios that you would lack certainty because you lack information.
I would say you could achieve certainty as to whether grandma has a poison dagger by investigating, by looking into the scenario, by, you strip her nude if need be, and then you...
but only upon gaining additional information. That's the biggest problem, is that many of the things that we may be certain of today, that we can't conceive of a way in which we could be wrong, we can be proven to be wrong in the future.
Right, but that you can be proven wrong on something, that you can come to wrong conclusions, doesn't imply that you are, as just a fact, wrong.
No, like, of course not. Like, just from a percentage perspective, right? You're probably more likely to be right than wrong.
So it's rational.
I'm saying there's a degree of certainty, right? That there are some things you're very certain of. There's some things that use logic that can be proven objectively true, right? And then there are some things that deal in the world where we are missing variables. And we recognize that we're always missing variables. And so when I say we're using the best evidence available, what I mean is that there are variables that we've yet to investigate, some of which we know of and some of which we don't know of. That is how we perceive the material world, is that there are variables as of yet unknown to us. And so my degree of certainty is never going to be 100% when it comes to phenomena that is occurring currently in the world and my ability to predict accurately every aspect of the phenomena, because I know I'm missing things.
Sure, it's definitely, if you go, well, I haven't actually done these experiments that I could do, then yeah, you would know for certain that, hey, right, that, hey, that there is some missing information here which might be pertinent. And that's completely fine. But so what I'm getting at here is, just against the method of Cartesian doubt is, where just, well, you might make some error, so therefore you can't come to certainty on anything. That's what I'm attacking here, is that you can't be certain about anything because you always might have been wrong somewhere in your chain of deduction.
I mean, see, I'm like 50-50 on this, like, because I would say that you could know for certain, certain things within the physical world, right? I think there are certain hard science thing. I mean, you mentioned that the sky is blue, even though technically it's not blue. It's just reflecting every other color but blue. So, but that's a language thing more than it is an actual science thing. But I mean, like, you can know that water is made of H2O. And we may discover at some later date that, as we did discover that, that it's made up of additional particles, right? That there are neutrinos that are bouncing around, like I think it's something like some crazy, like 40,000 pass through your body a minute or something, right? Like there are all these little, quirks, the Hadron Collider, trying to find the God particle. Like there are all these other elements of water other than H2O, but they're not other than H2O because that's what water is made up of. There are other things there that we didn't know about. And there are pieces of hydrogen and oxygen molecules that we didn't know about. But that doesn't mean that water is not made of H2O. You will never run an experiment that proves that water is made up of something other than H2O, primarily. Like I said, but we did find that there was other building blocks that are present in water, but it is primarily made up of H2O. And yeah,
that actually segues into something interesting.
Okay, go ahead.
So the way you could say it is, within a certain domain, water is indeed made of H2O, but you could break it down into further domains. So an easier way to describe this is Newtonian mechanics as against relativity, right? So just a quick rundown in relativity. Time is relative between people. I'm just going to assume that relativity is all fine and Newtonian mechanics is all fine, for the purposes of this discussion.
Please don't become one of those objectivists that start fucking ranting against relativity, please.
No,
it's not right now.
Because I know there's people out there like that. So I'm just assuming for the sake of discussion that it's
right. Yeah, of course.
So there are some people who say, well, relativity, that then debunks Newtonian mechanics because it comes to different conclusions. But the correct way to look at this is Newtonian mechanics is valid within a certain domain, and then outside of that domain you have to go to relativity. So if you're under normal circumstances where you're just like, you're throwing a ball in your back garden, Newtonian mechanics is entirely correct there. It entirely correctly predicts everything. If you're in low gravity situations and low speed situations, Newtonian mechanics is entirely still correct. Right, but it's when you go into these, edge case scenarios, that's when Newtonian mechanics it doesn't cover those situations, right?
Right,
it's a different domain of understanding.
But it's like, so you might even say, theoretically, Newtonian physics is the domain under which these elements are at play, and those elements are always at play from damn near everything we can see with a telescope and everything that happens on Earth. So the fact that something else was added doesn't necessarily debunk Newtonian physics, because Newtonian physics, unbeknownst to those working under that framework for so long, was calculating under a specific domain that includes gravity existing and having a play within a field of space.
Yeah. You've hit it on the head of the nail there. It's these further conclusions, they don't invalidate the earlier conclusions in Newtonian mechanics.
Okay, I mean, it starts to get nerdy, but I think we can accept, right, that there is a reasonable degree of certainty, right, when it comes to the defense of property. And it is of your opinion that self-defense stops being self-defense and begins becoming aggression when the person, for whatever reason, either their personal rage, their emotional whatever, or their own ignorance because of their incapacity to properly maintain property, goes into the domain of that which a reasonable person given the evidence that they have, would draw the conclusion that this action is unnecessary to exclude someone from their property.
Yes, but with the caveat that it's not because the reasonable person thinks this that therefore it's true.
Mhm.
It's that they're a reasonable person means that they would be driving the correct conclusions based on the evidence.
Mhm.
Like, so
Well, yeah, it
it's
was
what the actual evidence comes first.
right. And the reason I add the caveat reasonable, maybe I did this prematurely, but I would add the caveat reasonable because I'm describing again, once we get out of the interaction and we're talking about legality and restitution, etc. I as a this is where the intersubjectivity comes in, right? Because I'm not you, I don't have your brain, right? When looking at the evidence post hoc, I'm going to be looking not at the evidence that's available now, but the evidence that was available to you. And I have to basically determine the action that you took was reasonable was the action that a reasonable person would come to was necessary for exclusion from the property. Because it may be, in fact, that grandma has a poison dagger, right? And it also may be that, person X, whose property it is, decides they're going to blast grandma the moment she steps onto their property. And that is, even though they were in fact correct that grandma was a serial killer that did this multiple times, and no one knew about it, right? A secret serial killer. Regardless, what they did is blast onto a random grandma that stumbled onto their property, despite the fact that she had murderous intent. But there was no evidence available to that person that they had murderous intent. How do we deal with that situation, I guess?
It would depend on what evidence is available at the time of judgment. It's not at the time of the actual defense taking place. So
Okay.
so
So
even if
they
you're
were
just lucky, right, and
so they
you
were
call
lucky.
this
They were
your
kind of
fault.
like they were kind of the same way we talk about like when we talk about evictionism and the baby, right? Or other things. It's like you can be an accidental trespasser, but the same way that you can be an accidental trespasser, you can accidentally be lucky that grandma actually was a serial killer,
Mhm.
etc. And you kind of lucked out in you had an intent to murder, but all you did was kill a serial killer that was devoid of rights.
Yes, and there's actually a good
Okay.
chart. I'll send it to you.
But does that work in the
Uh,
inverse?
what do you mean in the inverse?
So I guess the inverse would be um yeah, no, there wouldn't be an inverse, would there? Actually, now that I think
Oh,
about it.
I'm just gonna send you this chart that my friend made, where
Where are you
it
sending it
goes.
to?
I'll send it on your Discord. Hold on.
Okay.
Where it goes over this bit for it's like a matrix of when is rape justified or not.
Okay.
Um,
It's
so
always rape. It's always rape
there
with you. Every time I fucking talk to you.
so there's one kind where the guy thinks that he's raping, where she's like really like she's trying to get him to think that he's raping her for because she gets off on that or whatever, but she did consent still. So under that situation, it's fine. There was uh, consent given, so it's still consensual sex. So the same would exist for this grandma. You got lucky that your rape was actually it wasn't rape, and here you got lucky that when you're trying to murder this person, it actually wasn't murder.
Okay, I'm going to share this because it's such a hilarious slide. Hold on. Where is it?
I sent it
Oh,
to
is
your
this Nye?
DM.
Nye made this?
Mhm.
Did Nye make this? Of course,
Yes.
Nye made this. I've still yet to talk to him. Only heard of him. Oh my gosh, this is so complicated and autistic. Oh God. Okay. Consent, desire, will, consent given, consent received, consensual sex. What does consent received mean in this regard?
So I
Consent's
think
given.
so it's like if so consent is being basically like communication between two people. So if consent is received, it means
Oh, here we
I
go.
have received the consent. I've understood
She's
it.
subtle. He misses the cue. Okay, yeah. So he has the mens rea, the guilty mind of a rapist. But it was in fact consensual sex.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I think you're lagging a little bit.
Am I? Hold on. Let me redo my my mic. Testing.
Yep, that sounds good.
Yeah, for whatever reason, StreamYards especially, like geeks out my my XLR mic, and like occasionally it'll just like input a massive amount of lag, and I have to just like unplug and plug it in.
Yeah, strange.
Weird. Whatever. It's very strange. Yeah. So I guess the situation then is, what is the standard of? So I guess what you would say is, what is reasonable might be the wrong word here, but the right word is the objectively correct means of self-defense is determined at the time of court, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, my problem is, so I was intuiting a reverse scenario, and I guess maybe I should ask it this way. So what if grandma comes into my stumbles into my my driveway or whatever, right? She doesn't stumble in, she's going door to door. She's a Jehovah's Witness, right? And I don't have a no trespassing sign. I have a common egress, right? Which is to say I have like a short driveway and like a front porch, right? Nothing that communicates to someone else, stay off my property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they seem perfectly happy to come knock on my door. And then I look out the window, right? And I see I see as their jacket moves, I see a firearm, right? So I know they're armed, right? And also I just heard a news story about a guy that fits this person's description exactly, that looks like a police sketch that looks just like this guy, pretending to be a Jehovah's Witness going door to door, and he's actually there to rape and murder your family. Mm-hmm. Okay? So this person comes onto my property, looks exactly the way, I can tell he's armed, and he looks, as far as I can tell, 1-to-1 exactly like, the guy that's going door to door killing people. And so what I do is I fire on him. Right? Mm-hmm. Then in court, we look at all of the available evidence, and it turns out that guy was caught. That this is a completely different guy. That's just an innocent Jehovah's Witness with a firearm that's going door to door, that just innocently looks exactly like the other guy, right? They're identical twins separated at birth, right? Like they look 1-to-1 the same. Am I now a murderer by accident and by the same degree? Because all of the evidence that I had then would have made me pretty certain that this is the murderer. Does it then become I have a duty to a warning shot? Like, where is this? We say it's objective, but it seems like I don't know that it is objective, right? Like I'm not seeing the objectivity. What I'm seeing is a standard by which we're kind of like, it just seems like we're just kind of like, well, the available evidence, right? Well, we might disagree on what that evidence means. We might come to different conclusions. I don't know. How do you feel about the example I gave?
Yeah, so in that example, you would indeed be a murderer. And this is a good reason why, in a just and free society, you should be damn well careful about just like, Oscar Pistorius shooting at people randomly.
Right. You should probably fire a warning shot at the very least, right?
Yeah, or say, get the fuck out of here. I don't want you here,
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, so that would be a situation where...
What if he's deaf and you yell, get out of here, and he keeps walking, and then you fire a warning shot, but like you did it with the window open and he didn't see, right? So like you fired a warning shot and you screamed to get out of here, and the guy just keeps chugging along like nothing happened.
So in that situation, you are actually communicating to this guy, hey, fuck off, in as clearly a plain Jane as you could possibly communicate that thing. You're saying, I don't want you on my fucking property, through multiple means. You're shooting at him, you're shouting at him, You're doing everything in your power to say, hey, I do not want you on my property. So in that case, he is indeed trespassing, and it would be required for you to shoot him to get rid of him.
So here's my issue with that. Like, I agree. I kind of intuitively like that answer, right? Because we're looking at what is necessary to exclude. What is necessary to exclude is to communicate, to then give a kind of like rules of engagement, which is like escalate to like a warning shot potentially, or like physical removal with hands, right? All of the evidence, shows that this guy, or to the best of your knowledge, is a serial killer, right? Because he looks identical to the known serial killer, and he's armed. So, going out and like physically trying to shove him is probably a terrible idea, because you're going to get shot and killed, because this is a serial killer with a gun. And yet the objective truth is that this man is just an innocent person going door to door, walking up a sidewalk that didn't hear you. So like, how can we say it's objective, right? Like, what is the objective part? Is it the intent of the property owner that is the objective means by which their interpretation of the data, available evidence or data, is ruling their duty or obligation to appropriately, because they don't have sovereignty over their property now, right? They only have, not fully anyways. Is that the objective part, not necessarily the circumstances of the thing? Because if so, you should still be charged with murder of the grandmother who actually was a serial killer with a poisoned blade. That should still be murder, even though you were lucky in the fact that she was. You see what I'm saying? Like, it seems like we're using two different metrics in two different cases. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something.
So the answer here is that you can indeed split it up into mens rea, which means guilty mind, and actus reus, which means guilty act. So in the case where you are trying to murder someone, and then it turns out later that you're actually allowed to murder them, you didn't have any guilty act. You did have mens rea, but there's no crime committed, so it's kind of, you might be a bastard or something, right? This comes up in punishment theory. I suppose we could go on to that later or something. But for the case here, where you are indeed doing everything in your power to communicate to this guy that you don't want him there, the objective, what objective is referring to, is what actually occurred between you people, right? Was there a guilty action here? And no, you were doing everything that you could possibly do, the plainest day communication you could possibly have to get someone off your property. And if he's so, like, incapacitated, so dumb that he doesn't notice like someone firing warning shots at him and, get out of here, even if he's deaf, like, if I see someone like firing at me going, as I'm walking up, I'm gonna go,
right,
I should probably fuck off right now.
Right. Or I'm going door to door armed, looking exactly like a known serial killer, and I don't know, fucking pay attention, or like get someone with me that has a hearing aid.
Yeah. So at that point, it would be, you did everything in your power to try and exclude this guy. You are trying to exclude him. You are trying to get him away from your property. You're trying to shoo him away. You've done everything to try and do that. And now all that's left for you to do is to shoot him.
So,
right?
So what you're saying is that we actually have to break it down into 4 categories in order to understand this in terms of what is and isn't right. Right. So one category would be mens rea and actus reus, right? Guilty action occurred and you had a guilty mind, guilty, right? Like you're just full blown guilty, right? And then there is guilty act, but no mens rea, no guilty mind. And this is the scenario that we're talking about with the serial killer, the non-serial killer Jehovah's Witness, right? Is technically speaking, you murdered a guy that is not the serial killer. But
assuming you didn't do the warning shots. So in the situation where you didn't do warning shots.
Right. That would be no mens rea, but it would be guilty act, actus reus, right? And then what you're saying is despite the fact that an innocent in terms of like not the serial killer was killed, if you do everything that is reasonable, even if it's not a guilty act, it's an unfortunate circumstance. It's no longer a guilty act because you did everything in your power to alleviate the guilty act, which is you all of the evidence pointed to this guy being crazy. You yelled at him, you gave a warning shot, he was on your property. You did everything you could to exclude the person. And like, even under these circumstances, there are extreme, rare circumstances where individuals can be wounded or harmed in some way. And that action is not an act of aggression. And therefore, there's no, because it's not an act of aggression, there's no restitution that ought be paid.
Yeah. I mean, even
because
if this
there's no
guy,
crime committed.
Even if this guy was, looked nothing like a serial killer, there is no serial killer going, right? You just decide, you know what, today, I don't want this guy going up my driveway. I don't like the look of him. And then you start shouting at him and shooting at, that would still be fine. It might be.
Yeah, solicitors will be shot on site, and then is a sign right at your front door, and you scream, "Get the fuck out of here!" And then he doesn't do anything, and then you start blasting because there's a fucking sign that says, "I'm going to start blasting."
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So with that in mind, I think what we're saying now is that what is reasonable in self-defense is that which is reasonable to exclude someone from your property, which would mean in the booby trap evidence case that I kind of brought up on Twitter, you wouldn't be allowed to do that at all because you're actually not communicating, but you could because it's communicated it's your property and not to be on your property, I guess, by the fact that it's not their property, right? By the fact that they're stealing a bike.
By the fact that it is your property, that means you are indeed enacting some sort of exclusion costs to keep people away from it, right? So,
so pause real quick. What I'm discussing for those that don't know is a video that I just saw on Twitter, and it's like a bike, and like someone set up a camera in front of the bike, and when you sit on the bike, there's nothing holding the seat together other than like a thin piece of cloth. So the metal pipe on the bike immediately just jams up your butt, right up your keister. Is just a big old metal pipe, and people are filming it. And there was some lefties that were like, "How fucking dare you? Like, this is so much worse than stealing a bike." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think it's worse than stealing a bike, man. Like, this doesn't seem like aggression because like nobody's dying in this. It's not, the aggression's not exceeding the crime." In terms of like to where you become the aggressor, and you kind of like corrected me, and I think appropriately. And I even said so immediately, like, yeah, I think that's closer to what I mean, which is this is a reasonable form of self-defense against your property. But what would be unreasonable in terms of a booby trap of what is clearly communicated not to be their property?
So it depends on the principle behind which booby traps are just. Depends on if it wasn't a booby trap, if I was there and I was actually doing it, would I be allowed to do it? So a good example of this, there was this case, I believe it might have been in the UK, or it might be over in America somewhere, I can't remember, where like this old guy, his house kept getting broken into in the night. Like he was like, he was
it
like,
was America. So then I started blasting. She was like, no, I'm pregnant. Is that what you're talking about?
No. This is where he had his house kept getting broken into, like a house where he wasn't staying at or something. I can't remember, but like he was getting pissed off that they kept breaking into this place that he owns, and they kept rummaging around in there and stuff. Like, it's like, hey, stop damaging my fucking property. He kept boarding up the windows, doing everything he could to get these people to stop. And then one day he tied up a shotgun on the stairs and put a string to the door, so when they broke open the door, it would shoot them. And it broke off this burglar's leg. And the question was, well, is that excessive? So the answer to that is, if he was just sitting there and he had the shotgun pointing at the door, would it be excessive? I say in that case, no. But there are certainly cases where, it would be excessive. So,
the egress situation. Yeah. If I booby trapped my front door, if I booby trapped the second step on the 3 steps going into my house, right? so that when you stood on the second step, like it triggered a concealed shotgun right next to the porch that was hidden behind vines and lattice and like blew your legs off. Right. And I lived in a neighborhood with like a regular driveway and like walkway that is inviting, that is normal egress, which communicates to the world, unless there's a no trespassing sign, that this is a pathway in which you can come to me. There's no soliciting sign or anything. It is a normal society, you know. And again, this is like that part of that intersubjective kind of part of embordering, right? There's no gate that's locked that says don't, you know, that communicates don't cross this gate. Instead, it's an open concept. That would be a booby trap that, like, if you were there in person, you can't just blow the kneecaps off of someone for being like, hey, I just moved into the neighborhood and I made you an apple pie. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like that would be an excessive booby trap.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing is true for, you know, there's a question sometimes of, oh, what if I want to homestead a piece of ground by planting a mine underneath it in the middle of the woods, right? And then covering it up with leaves and stuff. That would not be justified. It would be as if somebody were just walking along and then you threw a grenade at their feet, right? It'd be the same sort of thing.
Right. So, I mean, I had this. Oh, it's on the wrong. That's why I didn't hear it. It's coming out of my speakers, not my headphones. Anyway, sorry. I was trying to mark something in the recording. So I had this kind of a similar situation when I was discussing with ThoughtBat, right? And ThoughtBat loves to use this analogy of like quicksand with like a piece of rope, and then like a sign that says, don't touch the rope. This is my private property. And like my child is like about to die in quicksand and the rope will save their life. And like, you know, and it was a real edge case for me, right? It was like, you know, it was like even stronger, I thought, than the flagpole analogy. And then I got to a certain point in my thinking and I was like, who the fuck finds and or plants quicksand in the middle of a walkable trail in the woods and then as a piece of rope that can save your life and then is like, hey, by the way, don't touch it or I'm going to sue you. And then it's like, I'm a private property violator by touch. I'm like, no, this is clearly a booby trap. Like this is clearly some asshole that has intentionally found something in the hopes of gaining like some financial gain from like a loophole in the system, and or may have been the person that placed this quicksand to begin with in the hopes that it would, like, my kid would like be drowning in quicksand and I would need to like violate his rights in order to do it. And I was just like, yeah, no, I'm touching the rope. I don't know who this asshole is that put this rope out here, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, they put the quicksand out here too. Like, I don't know who this person is. They're not here. Like, yeah, no, I'm out. Like, this is clearly a booby trap designed to harm. But I mean, like, but again, you know, if the person was there, could they defend their rope? I don't know.
Yeah, so this is like one of those flagpole type scenarios. One way I like to highlight why, yeah, you do have the right to defend your rope or your flagpole, and why you don't have a right to grab onto it morally or otherwise, is imagine if instead, you know, I'm just standing by a cliff with my giant swinging cock over the edge, and then you stumble and fall and you grab onto my cock, and it's like, let go of my fucking cock, you're gonna rip it off or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be perfectly within my rights to like start swinging it and get you off of there. You know,
Right,
you don't have a
right.
right to be grabbing my cock on your way up.
Well, I mean, I think many of these limit cases are exactly that. One, they're a limit case, and two, they don't matter pragmatically in the real world. Because in the real world, most societies are going to have insurance agencies where you essentially sign away those rights, right? Like I think the flagpole next to an apartment complex, like there's probably some fine print in your agreement that says, you know, when someone's about to die and your property can be used to save their life in the means, like, so long as we insure you, you know, you agree to let us do this, mostly because it would just be cheaper because most people, the overwhelming majority of people will sign that and not care, and it will avoid frivolous lawsuits. So like these kind of limit cases often are really only theoretical, because even in Ancapistan, they probably wouldn't exist, because you would just nationwide would just sign that away. Yeah.
I mean, this is what it means to have a limit case. You know, it's
well, I mean, like, even in even when they can kind of sound like our ideology would allow this, it's like, well, it does. But like, you rightly bring up that this is a problem, that this is kind of, that the idea of this is in some ways feels conflict inducing, even though it's not conflict inducing. And because it feels that way via the Thomas principle, you know, when things feel a certain way, they kind of become true, even though they're not true, because they live in the hearts and minds of people, like as a concept, you know. And so once that occurs, that people would probably just sign it away.
I think what's going on with these, like, you know, flagpole or lifeboat type scenarios is people are just finding out, well, you know, what is legal is a very wide ring, you know, just outside of this, don't do that. Definitely stop doing that. But inside it, you can do all sorts of crazy shit. You can do all sorts
Yeah.
of dumb shit, right? But it's
What's
not the realm of
legal
the
is
law to
not
deal
what's
with that.
moral. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
the natural law is not supposed to dictate morality. It's just
Mm-hmm.
supposed to dictate what you like objectively cannot do without being an aggressor and without being a kind of a threat to everyone else's established order. Right.
Yeah, like
I know I'm being
somebody,
intentionally vague here, but like I try to be as matter of fact that all libertarians would agree with, right? Because we could say it objectively gives us ought nots, right? And then there's gonna be a debate in the comments. I don't want that, right? At its very least, we can say for sure that it says those of you who do not do who do not follow within this bounds are a threat to the established order of a community that needs to live together and communicate an ethical framework by which they can live together with the least amount of conflict inducing things occurring.
yeah, it's like a bare minimum. You're gonna meet this bare minimum bar. Just don't be aggressing against people. That's the bare minimum. You can go way beyond that. Yes, very good. You know, if somebody's like hang off your flagpole, yeah, don't shake it. Don't say I want to keep my flagpole in pristine. Yeah, don't do that.
You're an
Right?
asshole, but that doesn't mean you don't have a right to do that. You absolutely have a right to spray Pam on your flagpole so that when I attempt to grab onto your flagpole, I slide on down to my death.
Yeah,
you have that
in
right.
which case, like, congratulations for being like omniscient or something that you know somebody's gonna at some point be grabbing on.
Well, it was for the squirrels. It was for the squirrels. You know, squirrels don't have rights.
Another way to think about this is, you know, imagine there was no flagpole, then the person was going to plummet to their death anyway, right? So it's like there's this Winan quote in The Fountainhead where it's like he's talking about like people are wanting to get on his paper because it's like, oh, freedom of the press, you know, they're unionizing and stuff, and he's like, freedom of the press? What press would there even be to be free on if it wasn't for me? Because he like built up the entire newspaper industry. It's like freedom of hanging on to flagpoles. What flagpole would there even be to be free to hang on to if I didn't fucking put it there?
Right. So I guess when it comes to booby trapping, it's I have a hypothetical, and when I say hypothetical, wink, wink, completely a hypothetical. Okay. When I was a child, I have a mother, hypothetically, and I have a father, and they split up. So I have an every other weekend dad, right? Pretty common, the typical American family these days, as I am an every other weekend family. Dad, right? The true nuclear family, every other weekend dad. And so my father, hypothetically, lived in a really bad neighborhood. And when I say a really bad neighborhood, what I mean is one time we called the cops, and then they showed up the next day, but we called them at night saying, hey, we just heard a bunch of gunshots across the street. And the next day they showed up and we were like, why are you here? And they go, we don't have to come to your neighborhood just because you call. And we don't come to this neighborhood at night. We come the next morning. And I was like, oh, okay. Just thanks for letting me know. It's like, can I hire? You know, right? It's like they were really letting me know. It's the only time in my life any cop was ever honest about the fact that they don't have a duty to protect, right? Unlike if you have private security, they do via the contract. So in this neighborhood, we had a basement, and our basement constantly got broken into, and my bike was stolen multiple times. from people that knew that I had a bike, probably from my own people I called friends, were stealing my bikes constantly. And my father, who allegedly may have been a bike thief for many years as a kid, was very good at finding my bike and being like, fuck you, that's my son's bike. Here's the VIN number. Here's the receipt. Give me the bike back. And they'd get off the bike. I'd get my bike back. And then I'd have it for like 2 weeks or like a month or two. And then it would get broken into again. And so my bike would be stolen. So my dad was getting sick of it. So allegedly, my father may or may not have put a board with rusty nails right by the door that they were breaking into and covered it in leaves, and may or may not have had an electric thing that was like a battery recharger for like a John boat, like those little boats you go fishing in and like lakes and stuff, little tin cans. They have like little trolling motors and they have batteries. And so there's a thing that you hook those up and plug that into the wall and then ran wires around the one window. And allegedly, we may have come downstairs one day and found a busted door and some rustled leaves and a nail with some blood on it and a bicycle that was still there. So my question to you is that's allowed, right? Like after a certain point, after it's getting broken into multiple times, it's the basement, it's a locked door. Would you be justified in sticking a nail in the bottom of a foot of someone that does that? It's not really a typical form of defense.
It's not typical, but I mean, if your father was there and this guy was trying to like run into and take your bike, then allegedly, then yeah, he would be allowed to like poke them with a nail. Poking with a nail is not a huge, it's not like a rocket launcher or anything. This
Right.
is it's very much understood that if I were to run over to my neighbor's house and run around the back and then try breaking down their their basement door, that's like, you don't go to the back in the basement, you go to the front door, right? If you want to talk to people, that's the communication. They say, hey, I have a front door. You come to the front door. This is where you come to me, right? If you want to be talking on civil terms, if you're trying to go around the back, then you're going round the back. Like that's shady shit.
So
yeah,
returning back to the bicycle then, what would be an inappropriate form of booby trapping for a bicycle? Because the bicycle communicates by its existence that it's someone else's property and not to be stolen, right?
Mhm.
So we can skip the step of I have communicated stop, and we can skip but can we skip the warning shot? I tend to think that in the example that we're looking at, the metal pipe that is your warning shot. It appears to be that is a warning shot, but I don't think I could put a grenade next to on it so that when you grabbed it, it immediately grenaded you, right? Could you?
Well, let's imagine just like the most reductio scenario possible. Maybe when they sit on it, there's a pressure plate which then sets off a hydrogen bomb and destroys everything in like a 10-mile radius. Like that would clearly, if somebody was stealing your bike and you're like, hey, and you launch the hydrogen bomb, that would clearly not be required for getting them off your bike. But, just ramming up the ass with a pole, yeah, it may be required, poking them with a pole, poking them, trying to get them off
the
your bike.
hydrogen bomb, I think that the hydrogen bomb actually is the perfect segue to my third question, which is war in terms of self-defense. I have been, so recently, I don't know if you know this, if you've been following me or whatever. I haven't been doing a ton because I've been moving and in and out of the doctor's visits and stuff. But what I have been doing is I've been fairly involved, much to the chagrin of basically every other libertarian, in some ways defending Israel during this conflict in Gaza. In many ways attacking Israel, right? Saying that what they're doing is wrong. I think the blockade is wrong. I think the displacement of people without setting up refugee camps may or may not be Israel's responsibility, or at the very least, that one's questionable to me. Cutting off water, I don't really care. But there are other issues there too. And so it really does come to this question of what is acceptable collateral damage, if any is acceptable, in a war. And if no collateral damage is acceptable, as many a ton of libertarians have been screaming at me that like one innocent person dead means like that they're like the worst aggressors and they all must be put to death for their part in the killing of an innocent. How is it possible for a libertarian society to defend themselves at all against aggressors?
So, my boss, Dan Sanchez, has a good article on this. It's towards a theory of peace, I think it's called. I can look it up after
Yeah,
this
sure.
if you want to put it in like show notes or something.
I mean, because I have my opinion, and you know, and this I don't want to get debate broy or anything right at the end because
Mhm.
I've been loving this conversation. I have an opinion in formulation, but I'm super curious about yours as well.
So yeah, my basic idea um, is that war itself is basically a collectivist concept.
Mm-hmm.
It is this group
Mm-hmm.
is righteous, and they're attacking this group, which is this is the aggressor group. And
Right.
of course, groups, they don't have any metaphysical existence into themselves, right? They're just the people. So we need to break it down into the individual level of, well, this individual Israeli is being aggressed upon by these Palestinians, and these Palestinians, break it down into the individual level. So yeah, it wouldn't be war of Group A in an all-out attack on Group B.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it would be individuals on both sides need to get together, like with just general disputes in the market, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
have general disputes, if I was an American citizen and I was having a dispute with you, we wouldn't include that as part of the concept of, oh my god, there's a civil war in America, right? It would be, no, these two guys, they're going at it, right? And we need to deal with it on the individual level. So the way you deal with Israel versus Palestine is you first of all stop the blockade, let Palestine start trading with the world, make them, stop giving them all this international aid. So they're not a dependent population.
Yeah. It's the
Stop.
largest welfare state in human history, basically.
Yeah, because you're breeding terrorists there, right?
So if I can, before we get into foreign policy, like I agree, I almost certainly agree with that idea, and I agree with the concept of Israel. My problem is, and I agree with the concept of Palestine. I have two problems. Number one, Israel, like any nation state, has stolen from its citizens the right of establishing order in a community by voluntary means. I've reformulated this because I kind of had an aha moment that I think many libertarians maybe don't realize. They kind of intuit, but they don't realize, or they're not communicating to our conservatives, especially, which is that I think the biggest crime of the state is that anarchy isn't chaos; it's order. I mean, that's the symbol, right? Anarchy is order. Government is civil war from Belgaro, right? That's the AO. Even though Belgaro was clearly a minarchist libertarian and not an anarchist, hilariously enough, he believed in like a night watchman state. Is the guy that came up with the anarchism symbol and wrote the Anarchist Manifesto. But nevertheless, they've stolen the right of establishing order, the right for us to create a covenant community or to have our own policing system voluntarily, like the right of like business and the market and people's free choices to establish order via competition in the market and people's voluntary choices. But setting that aside, I think I agree with this concept of like Israel as a group. Israel is an illegitimate nation state, as all nation states are, with maybe the exception of Lieberland. I think you could make an argument that Lieberland is a state in some regards, but is purely voluntary. So it fits into that like weird gray area between covenant community and like what objectivists argue for. But nevertheless, the problem I have is with Hamas, and with Israel, because Israel having stolen that right, well, they're holding that right. The right thing for them to do, the only moral thing for them to do is to dissolve as a nation, right? That is the only moral thing that any nation state can do, is to dissolve itself. Every individual actor in the nation state, the only moral, ethical thing is to take steps towards the dissolution, whatever those steps may be. But obviously that's not going to happen. And so I get into this kind of like Hoppian question, which is the state now responsible for restitution in lieu of what it is that they have stolen? Because obviously they claim legitimacy over restitution for the families of victims of Hamas. So is it Israel's responsibility to then go get that restitution and retribution? Or is that always by default wrong because they're illegitimate in their theft of that capacity? And are they kind of compounding their crimes by not doing that responsibility of which they stole from citizens? So that's kind of like problem one. I'll stay there and let you respond to that before I get to problem two.
Sure. So, there is certain the right of retribution to punish someone. That is a property right. It's owned by the victim, and it would pass on to their heirs, right? So it is
or voluntarily pass on to like a police agency.
Yeah, but I would say that the Israeli government they never acquired this right.
Right, they stole it.
They're just I don't even think they stole it. They're just going. It would be like if you murdered me, and it passes on to my child, and then my child has the right of retribution, and then if some other random guy comes along and shoots you, right? That's completely disconnected from the actual right of retribution. There, the right of retribution wasn't up for grabs, right? That's just a murder, right? That's just a straight up murder there.
Well, I struggle with that too, because if I murder you, your son, and you have a son, eldest son, right? We'll say, right, just to make it easy, or eldest daughter, I don't care. You have the eldest child has a right to retribution that was passed on after your murder, to murder me. But I also don't have. I've lost my ability to maintain my right to life from other people too, right? I mean, like if I'm a known murderer, like I proudly proclaim it to the world with evidence and everything, so that the whole world knows that I am a violent psychopathic murderer, and I'm proud of my kill. I guess another person killing me has in some ways stolen the right of retribution from you or from your child, right? But they haven't wronged me in any capacity, and in some way, because I'm already like devoid of that right until I somehow recant in some position, till I give myself up to your children and say, my life is in your hands. I repent. I'm sorry. Do you want money or do you want my life? And your kid says, I want $1 million, and I just happen to have $1 million, right? Because that's
so the foundation of that, which you described there, where you give your life up and they say, I'll take the $1 million instead of the life. What that is they are trading the right to kill you in exchange for $1 million. So the right to kill you then goes back to yourself. So other people wouldn't be allowed to come in and enact retribution. And the same is true if it passes on to my child. And then they just came along anyway, right? Some random guy killed you.
Right, but like if he killed me because he believed me to be a threat to society by my actions, you know what I mean? Like, is that wrong per se? So if I'm a violent killer?
It's a different thing if you are threatening. Like if you went up to a lady, like a small little lady on the street and said, "Hey, I'm a murderer. Here's the evidence, babe. I'm gonna follow you home tonight." Like you're clearly threatening to murder.
Right. Well, I just mean by my existence, right? Like, let's say I don't actually threaten anyone in my community. I don't actually threaten anyone in my neighborhood. As far as all my neighbors are concerned, right? Up until this moment, I've been nothing but a great neighbor. I always cut my grass, and sometimes I even cut my neighbor's grass because he's an old guy, and I like his grass being. I don't like it when his grass gets out of control. Yeah, you know what I mean? Right. Yeah, you got it. Right. But then I communicate to the whole neighborhood, hey, I'm your friendly neighborhood Liquid Zulu murderer. It was so fucking good murdering him. I got a giant heart on killing that guy. Like, I think about it all the time, how amazing it was to murder him. And then they're like, are you going to murder us? And be like, Well, I'm not saying I'm going to murder you or not murder you. Like, I wouldn't make any threats against you guys. You're my neighbors, but do know I'm a violent murderer who gets rock hard when I think about murdering. And who knows if I do it again. Like, I'm a threat, obviously, but I'm not actually threatening anybody.
I think in the situation you described there,
Mhm.
like, I think you are underhandedly, like, wink, wink, I'm going to murder you there. I think you are
Well, the
communicating
reason
that
I'm
you're
doing
going to
this for a
murder.
reason, and I know it's kind of a debate bro tactic, so I won't be dishonest about it because I'm trying to like get to the truth, right? Which is that like this is kind of how I feel about Hamas, not the Palestinian people, but I feel this way about Hamas for two reasons. Number one, anyone that is in Hamas is, as far as I'm concerned, the getaway driver in an armed robbery where someone was killed, right? Like they're collectively committing to being to a group. They're staying committed to a terrorist group that constantly actually does threaten like everybody, right?
I would be, just to be clear, I would be fully willing to accept that every member of Hamas is actively on a pursuit to kill every Israeli or something like that.
Right, but
Like, I would be fully
this
willing
was
to
my
accept that.
issue with the idea of groups. When it's like I agree that the Palestinians as a group cannot be represented by Hamas as a group, but I don't think it's an anti-individualist, purely collectivist thing to say that if Hamas launches a terrorist attack, that I, as a family member, would have you, of someone that was killed that day, want retribution against Hamas because they are all equally culpable, other than potentially people that were a part of that group and then immediately left that group because they were like, holy shit, I didn't know this group was going to do that, right? Like everyone that after the terrorist attack are still claiming Hamas and are like, fucking God is great as we like, drive my daughter through the streets, her corpse through the streets, right? The celebrating Palestinians, you're right. That's collectivist garbage. Like all they did is maybe cheer, and it's shitty, but it's not criminal. But the people that are actively a part of a group
I have a good
that
analogy here.
collectively work to do this, right? So I'm saying, so like, I don't know that that's collectivist, but my question is the legitimacy of Israel's actions here?
So, the analogy I was thinking of, I'll put a
Mm-hmm.
note in your, um, so, the analogy I was thinking of is, with American cops. I think by becoming a cop in America, you are signing on, you're saying, "Yep, I completely agree that I'm going to be enforcing all of these unjust things. I'm going to be the boot of the state. I'm going to be trampling on everyone."
Right.
I think just by that action, you are
Well,
indeed, and you are
maybe
wearing.
not knowingly within like the first couple of months. You know what I mean? Like, I think you can give a pass to a rookie cop because nobody tells you that, right? Except for like the crazy anarchists that everyone thinks is wrong, right? Like nobody actually tells you that. But after a couple of weeks, you can't help but know that you're being trained to violate people's rights, right?
But I think even, like, even the rookie cop, I think, understands that he's going to be arresting people for possessing marijuana and stuff like that. Like, I think even by just
Yeah, but
donning the
they don't have.
uniform and
I'm
being a
saying
cop,
they don't have a concept that what they're doing is like a
that
violation of
doesn't
anybody's rights.
that doesn't mean they don't have mens rea. Like, the analogy would be, a Nazi
Mm,
prison guard. They think that what they were doing was justified because they thought
mm,
Jews didn't have any rights. But that
right.
they thought this doesn't mean that they didn't have a guilty mind. They still
Yeah. Okay.
knew
Fair
what they were
enough.
doing,
Right. Okay. Fair
right?
enough. Fair
So
enough.
I think the American cop here is by his nature, just as a cop, him qua cop, he is threatening everybody in the US, right? I think a similar thing might be able to be said with respect to Hamas. So I think it would be indeed potentially justifiable if I was just some random Israeli, if I see like a Hamas guy going down the street, it could indeed be justifiable for me to, kill him. Assuming Hamas is, I don't know anything about Hamas.
But
Assuming that
let's take it away from the individual Israeli, and we add another layer of complexity, which is the IDF. The IDF are the cops. These are criminals, as is Hamas. The analogy works for both of them.
Mhm.
And as a citizen of Israel or as a person in the world that wants to see or especially as a victim of Hamas, let's say, that wants to see these people eradicated and knows that the only means of actually eradicating Hamas is via the Israeli state. They know that no one else is going to actively like unless they're a wealthy billionaire and they can hire
The way to eradicate them, by the way, is
BlackRock.
removing the blockade. That's how you eradicate Hamas. You remove the blockade.
I mean, sure. I mean, I have advocated in my things. I do think the blockade needs to be gone, and I also think that I believe it's Israel's responsibility. I think what the U.S. should do is I think to be more accurate, is that we should try and strong arm via our UN votes to the best of our ability to get Israel to create refugee camps and blue zones and to act in the least collective punishment ways that we can get them to act. But the least collective punishment way technically is to just not fight Hamas, right? And I see that as also a kind of a woeful outcome for the victims that Israel has stolen their right of retribution from, and then refuses to seek retribution on the murderers of their family after having stolen it from them.
So I don't think they have actually stolen the right at all. They're just preventing you from exercising that right. It's like,
Well, that's what I mean. I apologize if the wording stealing means like they actually have possession of that right and therefore legitimacy. I only mean to say that like you have a right to retribution, and then they've told you we're going to arrest you if you do that. Right? Like if you start building rockets at your house, right, and start shooting them at Hamas, like we're going to come and arrest you.
Yeah, that's completely wrong. I completely agree there. That would be unjust. So the question would be, if I am just some random IDF guy and I see you going up the street and you're a Hamas guy, would I be allowed to kill you? I suppose it's sort of like a gang war situation there.
Yeah.
Is one gang member allowed to kill another gang member? I suppose so. I mean, do any of them? They're both threatening each other, right? They're both constant aggressors. I think they're basically like bears, right? They're bears fighting in the forest.
Right.
And some of us have to deal with these bears, unfortunately. I think that's the way to think about this.
Yeah,
Like, I'm not going to shed a tear for a Hamas guy dying or an IDF guy dying.
Yeah. So then, right, but then the question comes, what happens when Israel kills an innocent Palestinian by accident?
So it would depend on how precise they're being. I think Casimir might get pissed off at me for this, but I think they're not quite as precise as some people might like to think.
For sure. Israel is full of shit when Israel is one of the most precise militaries in human history. In terms of, I mean, they invented the knocking on the roof, right? Like they invented bombs without payloads specifically to warn people a few minutes before, so that they can evacuate if they're Palestinian citizens. And they call them, and they also send drones out to call them. The problem is that Hamas says this is psychological warfare from the Jews. Don't trust it. And then because they want those people to die so that they can use them as martyrs for their cause. But also at the same time, Israel didn't outlaw human shields until fucking 2002, which is wild to me. Like a nation state was still actively, as a part of government policy, using children as human shields in neighborhoods so that they wouldn't get shot in like 2001. And internationally it was outlawed in 2005. Like Israel was like basically the last ones. So like, yeah, they've certainly done things that are above and beyond, if this is even comparable, the gentleness principle here, or a rational thing. And yet, if they are doing in an individual case, like getting rid of Hamas and to the best of their ability, warning every citizen to leave, to not be killed, to not, et cetera, is there some, I get that Israel's not justified in its existence. So like as a nation state, so nothing is justified here, but like, what is how do we view that morally?
So this is what I was getting at with the Dan Sanchez article I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
is that their
I wrote down.
methods
Can you
are,
write down the article name again? What was the article name? You said it was your
I
boss.
believe
So
it's something to do with like a theory towards a theory of peace or something. Uh,
it's close enough that Google will figure it out.
yeah. So the 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 problem is like they're using per se collectivist um methods, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are like a bomb. That's a very collectivist type of weapon. Like the nuclear bomb is the most collectivist, right? It's I just want to blanket this entire area, destroy everything here. Even these precise bombs that, I don't know whether they have, but even if it's a precise bomb, it
Mm-hmm.
still is a bomb, right? It's not a laser. It's not going in and killing this one guy who's an aggressor, right? It's
Right.
destroying a whole area, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is um, the problem with it. It's the means. What they should do
Mm-hmm.
is get rid of that blockade, open up the Israeli state towards privatization, and then have some, private arbitration between individuals. That's how they should deal with it. And
Yeah. I
if
mean,
if they get rid of the blockade, then Hamas just disappears because then they can have trade with everybody.
I highly doubt Hamas just disappears. I think it's more complicated than Hamas just disappears. No offense. Um,
Hamas
like
only exists because the Palestinian society is a dependent one. It's dependent. It's getting all this international aid. It's a huge welfare state. You're breeding, and you keep bombing them every so often. So you have a bunch of young males who are getting who just have like everything giving
look,
to them.
I'll give you all of that, right? Like there's certainly blowback, there's welfare issues. The blockade certainly breeds resentment and hatred, and allows them to have power and
More
control
importantly,
in
it
a
means
lot of
they
ways.
can't get wealth for themselves. Like they can't trade with people. They can't
Listen.
make themselves better.
I agree that the blockade is bad and that it supports them and helps give them power. What I disagree with is the assumption that getting rid of the blockade automatically, does it right? Because we've had a blockade since what was it? Blockade began in, I want to say 2005. Is it 2005 that the blockade began? That was when they pulled out of the settlements. So there was no, since 2005, Gaza has been Jew free, um, because all of the Palestinians there, even before the blockade, would have driven out or killed any Jews that dared live there. Um, and so it's like before the blockade, like the blockade has caused a lot of problems, right? But like there was no blockade when the Palestinian Authority or the PLO, went into Jordan or Transjordan, right? And attempted a civil war in Black September in 1971. There was no blockade when the Palestinian Fedayeen, after being kicked out of Jordan, moved into Lebanon and started a civil war there that displaced the million Maronite Christians, and killed 120,000 on both sides. Israel killed a lot of people there too, right? Like there's a lot of other problems. So like I get you, the blockade is wrong. Getting rid of the blockade would almost certainly make things better, though I don't think Israel need open up their borders for trade, at least not yet, because I mean, how many discotheques are going to get bombed in Tel Aviv before you're like, hold on, fuck you, I'm closing my borders for a while. Um, but certainly getting rid of the blockade would alleviate a lot of problems, and there are certainly a lot of things that could be done. I think a two-state solution, et cetera. But getting away from all of that,
Zero state solution.
well, yeah. I think a two-state solution is probably the most practical situation here immediately. Obviously,
You're
zero state
you're
solution.
you're conflating the man-made with being immutable. There, it's an
No,
error.
I just think I think given all the available evidence, right, a zero state solution is not likely to be accepted by any party, and so it's just kind of a non-starter from those that have stolen authority.
Right, but it should still be advocated very strongly, and maybe a few centuries down the line we can get there, and we
Yeah,
won't
I mean
have
that's fair.
lingering statism.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean, like I would. You're right. You're right. I should at the very least mention it as the only moral choice that no one's going to pick because they all suck. Um, but getting back to this idea of the bombs, you know, again, you said, well, even if they're targeted bombs, it's not a laser strike. Okay, but like so is a gun, right? Like a gunshot, you could say a gunshot is a collectivist weapon because it has the potential to harm other people in the immediate surroundings, especially when, just like Hamas, the person you're aiming the gun at is using human shields, right? Like a terrorist that is holding a human is in my opinion no different than Hamas that is in a specific building with civilians and is shooting rockets and firing and making plans from that building. And you know what I mean? Like I don't see the substantive difference between these two. Now, if they were just bombing a whole block, and you can make the argument that they can go in with guns and that would be more specific than a bomb, right? That would be less area. But the problem with that is that Hamas knows, like Hamas would just pick them off, right? Like they would, like it would be a slaughter for the IDF. Like it's not a practical solution for them in terms of cost. But of course, once you get to war, you start doing those things, right? You start talking about cost benefit and human lives like dollar signs. And so my question really is like, if a targeted bomb is unacceptable, is a gunshot acceptable? Because especially once we look at the fact that they're similarly using human shields.
Yeah. So basically, like, yeah, can a gun be collectivist because it is it could hurt other people? Obviously, it's not per se collectivist. It's like yes, there is a guns are less collectivist than bombs. You could employ a bomb um where it's just targeting a single guy, right?
Right.
Um, but this bomb, as such, seems to be area based. Like I'm going to wipe out this area.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
most of the bombs that Israel uses, I mean, just for context, right? Most of them. So when you hear about like, oh, they sent out like 12,000 bombs, right? And then you hear there's a statistic that's running around where it's like they're saying, it's 1,200 bombs a day since Israel started bombing, and during the height of the Iraq War, America was only dropping 80 bombs a day, and people say that to be like, holy crap, look at the ethnic cleansing and the genocide that's occurring, right? And the reason Israel is sending out so many bombs is because it's really sending out 3 bombs for every one explosion. Number one. One is often used as like a marker to ensure that like it's essentially a test bomb to make sure they're bombing the right place. And then the second is like knocking on the roof to like to warn people, the final warning, like, dude, get out. And then the third bomb is designed to collapse the building.
yeah, so I would say uh, such a bombing campaign is definitely better than the Leonard Peikoff method of just glass the entire Middle East, apart from
Right. Turn it
Israel.
all to glass. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely
As,
better.
yeah.
But we still have this issue of, this is a neighborhood where there's a bunch of innocents here, and there's
Mm-hmm.
one guy, or even just let's say there's like a group of like 12 Hamas people,
Oh no,
and going to
Israel
damage a
is
bunch.
Israel is ridiculous for this because they have absolutely been bombing buildings that are where there's just like one dude in them, and they've
Mhm.
also been bombing buildings where there's no one in them, where they're not actually targeting the building to kill Hamas. They're targeting the building to cause damage to the property in the area, so that they don't basically so that they don't get wiped out when they do a ground invasion. Because like
Mhm.
if there's too many buildings and they don't have a pathway for them to go through, they'll just get sniper fire the entire time and they'll just be killed.
Yeah. So the proper way to deal with that type of
Mm-hmm.
situation is literally going like a surgical, like, spec ops team goes in and kills the individuals who are at fault here. Not just we need to destroy this building because there might be some people in there who are bad, but there's also people in that building who are not bad, right? That is you're literally grouping them all together as if
Mm-hmm.
they're one unit. But there is the caveat of the human shield, which is a genuine thing. If I'm holding you hostage, literally in front of me is a human shield, and I'm shooting at someone, then they are allowed to shoot through you to kill me, right? But I don't think
Mhm.
that applies in a lot of these cases because it's like they could literally go in and circumvent these shields. Like, they're shields only at a certain level of resolution when you have this bomb, right? But, I
Right.
mean, then everybody's a shield if you have a bomb which destroys the entire planet to, get rid of the granny who's on your lawn, right? That it's you need to consider what level of resolution is reasonable here, and I think we went over that with the defense thing. What is the reasonable, um, sort of approach towards this? Then there is one final aspect you brought up where it's this idea of a cost benefit analysis, where it's like, what are the costs of these people dying? And the problem there is that economic calculation problem. It's a military fundamentally, a state military. It
Oh,
doesn't
oh,
understand the
pause,
cost
pause,
of anything.
pause. Yes, I agree. I'm not saying I agree with the cost benefit analysis at all. I am simply saying that that is a habit one slips into once you succumb to the kind of collectivist argument and you begin to, argue in favor of state actions. Is that
Mhm.
you're immediately forced into the central planning cost benefit analysis type of thinking, which I'm saying is such a perilous danger
Yeah, yeah,
of
exactly.
of
Like,
of, of supporting state action and intervention.
and that's why it's like fundamentally collectivist. Like, it's fundamentally
Mhm.
like you are a central planner there. It's centrally planned defense. That's what war. You could say war is centrally planned defense. Um, so you don't know the proper methods. Like, there's a lot of discussion at the moment of, did Israel like deliberately let Hamas pull out this attack? I think you can't discount like just total military incompetence here. Like, it's entirely
Mhm.
possible that they were just incompetent. They didn't see it coming because they are centrally planning these things,
Well,
right?
I mean,
Fundamentally.
the same is true just for Hamas's existence, right? I mean, Bibi Netanyahu, we now know propped up Hamas financially,
Mhm.
in the hopes that Hamas would be a counter to the Marxist PLO.
Yeah, 'cause
And
they were more afraid of the communists than the, the
Islamists.
Islamists. Yeah.
Well, I think they were. It's not so much that they were more afraid of one over the other, so much as I think they thought, like so many in the West have thought, that they can prop up some little group that won't be a problem and it won't get out of their control. And of course,
Mhm.
every time it fucking backfires. What is happening? There's this. Occasionally get follows on YouTube, and like even though I have it muted, it still comes through on my Streamlabs. It's so weird. I have like it sound alerts muted, and yet it still comes through. It's fine, whatever. Um, yeah, I don't know, because the other thing here is right is like, so the discussion becomes, okay, well it must then be like bombs are too low resolution. It's not high resolution enough for it to be considered a form of self defense, even if, let's say, it was a Covenant Communities military that had voluntarily done it, and
Mhm.
some other group in a nearby community had declared war and had attacked us in some capacity, and we were going to criminally arrest those people. Um, the problem is that this is where I start to get into the position where you become crippled against an enemy that is not following any of this, number one, but even more so, this idea of like, I don't understand where the limit is. It's like, well, guns are okay, but is it wrong? Is it unethical? Does it deserve like dismantling of your private police force if they run in and throw a grenade into a room? Do they have to room clear with firearms and go through so like when you room clear and you go through the door, right? As a general rule of practice, let's say you have 4 people. What ends up happening is you go through one, and you kind of pre-trained to do this, but you go to one corner, and then you go to the next corner, and you ignore 2 corners of the room. Even if there's enemies there, you ignore them because you trust that the second person is doing your second corner and then the corner you didn't get to. And then the third person is doing the next corner, the last corner, and then one you didn't get to, etc. Right? And the reason you do this is because when you go through a door, it's what's known as the fatal funnel, right? Which is, this is basically where everybody dies. Because if you're an enemy and you're sitting in a room and you know the troops are coming, you sit with your guns trained on the door, and as soon as they come through the door, you just unload. You don't even have to aim. You're going to kill whatever comes through that door. And so to get through the door as quick as possible and neutralize the enemy as quick as possible, you get a corner. Hopefully you get to your second corner. The next guy gets that corner. Hopefully he gets to the next corner. The next guy gets a corner. Hopefully he gets to the next corner. Right. And so is it wrong if you don't even know if they have people in there, or if, the grenade might collapse the floor, which, is the next part. It's an area of effect attack that is not singular to throw a grenade into a room. And so by the logic that a bomb is wrong, but like a gun is okay, you could make the exact same argument that, because unless of course you're a collectivist and you think something is more wrong or less wrong, right? You can make the same argument that a grenade is wrong because it's not a bullet. And then eventually you get to a point where you're incapable of fighting at all. Like you must be a pacifist once you take this logic further and further. So like, I guess I need clarification as to why one is considered collectivist and the other isn't. Bullets ricochet, bullets bounce off of things, bullets split, bullets go through multiple people, as your own human shield analogy shows. You know what I mean? Like I don't get it.
So it depends on how you're using it. So
Mm-hmm.
you would have to be looking at the specific circumstances of this case. Was it all right to be using a bomb here? Was it all right? Should you rather be using something else? So it's this total war mentality. I mean, Israel and Palestine, they definitely have this total war mentality of, we are fighting against Palestine as a whole. We are fighting against Israel as a whole.
There's some hold on, pause. There's some right-wing Israeli people for sure that have that opinion. And there are some monsters within the Israeli government, as there are in Hamas, all of them, and in the Palestinian Authority. But I wouldn't say that the Israeli government believes that they are fighting a war as a whole against all of the Palestinian people. Because if they've been committing a genocide against these people, their population has done nothing but skyrocketed.
No, so I want to be clear, not against every single Palestinian. I'm fully willing to accept that they would, accept that not every single Palestinian is literally a combatant, right? Which people like Hassan Abi would disagree with. They would think that every Israeli is a combatant. So I would be fully willing to accept that. But they still are. It's still, this geographical territory is Palestine. It is ruled by Hamas. We are against Hamas. We are invading this territory. They're still collectivizing it in that sense.
Right.
So it's like, well, this is an acceptable loss. We're dealing with Palestine.
Even if we had a covenant community, right, and there was an aggressor military. Let's just say there's a warlord next to us, right? That has a community, and has an army, and is, his army is hiding within that community that he's terrorizing, right? And we're, a libertarian, Anarchistan, even. We don't even have to go as far as saying we're a covenant community, right? That we're, certain businesses were attacked, and like 2 or 3, agencies got together and decided, that we would, we all have restitution owed to us by this warlord. How do they fight? Even then, how do you not collectivize an area in which an army is, right? Like an army, if all of an army is collectively working against you, this idea that like, it seems like we're just using collectivize as like a naughty word, when like they're literally collectivizing themselves and in certain areas. And it's like, it's necessary to recognize that Hamas doesn't live in Tel Aviv, right? They live in Gaza. Like that's the area they're in. They're a group, right? Like they're working together collectively, right? I don't know. Like it doesn't answer the question of why a targeted bomb with multiple warnings is wrong, because it's, quote, collectivist, because it does too much area damage, right? But a gunshot or a grenade in a room is like an individual case by case basis. You see what I'm saying?
So So we could say this like Ancapistan Defense Force, this ADF,
right?
They're going in
the
there.
IDF.
Yeah, like fundamentally, they are not centrally planned. They would be able to actually calculate what is the best route of attack here, right? The IDF, they can't calculate what is the best route of attack here. It's not available to them to do this. That is the fundamental difference. IDF
does not
ADF
get funding. Can't either.
voluntarily. ADF is getting its funding voluntarily, though. That's
but they can't. They also, I mean, there's
they have
no
factor
difference.
prices.
Yeah, but there's no difference between the central planner and the capitalist in terms of the individual making a decision based upon what they think the market wants, right?
Because the capitalist actually has the data available to him to determine what is the best route.
No,
and the bad capitalists will go.
No, the capitalist is yes, you're correct that the market as an entity has price as a function, and that competition will kind of get us closer and closer, I think, with technology and competition to like the evenly rotating economy, right? But we're not in the evenly rotating economy. So the capitalist is always guessing what they think is the appropriate allocation of resources
point in the right
in
direction.
The future.
He can point towards the evenly rotating economy. The IDF can't even point in the right direction.
Yeah, but it is true that the capitalist could temporarily be bad at that, and the central planner could technically temporarily be better at it than the
only
ADF.
Accidentally, only ever accidentally, right?
Yeah,
they can't just as a principle
for sure
move themselves. This is what I mean by like pointing out.
Yeah, they can steal. They steal all their fucking money. So like it's highly unlikely that scenario occurs. But it doesn't mean that all I'm saying is it doesn't mean that the ADF in this example actually knows the best course of action in terms of price and profit and things like that. Only that they're incentivized towards moving towards the right direction in a way that centrally planners are disincentivized from moving towards the right direction. And so as a whole, the general rule of thumb is that the one incentivized towards knowing that information and accurately guessing what it will be in the future is going to be more accurate than the one disincentivized, or at the very least lacking incentives.
Right. But so sort of what I'm getting at here is like, it's just a completely different category when you have central planner as against capitalist. It's not like they're different degrees. Like the central planner is just on a lower rung of this ladder, right? So they're completely separate.
What you're saying is stepping outside of the ethical framework, because we kind of already are by even engaging in this conversation, because the state of Israel doesn't exist in an ethical way. I mean, it can't, right? So we're kind of already in the domain of like, you know, hypotheticals, moral preferences in terms of tactics that lead us towards anarchism and economics. And what you're saying is that like, even if the ADF is like really bad, it'll die because it's really bad and be replaced by something that's better. And that we can't look at these two things as like two sides of the same coin, because the only constraint that exists for the IDF is too much of the population getting so upset that they feel they're losing their power and they have to behave a little better. Whereas the ADF's constraint is all ethical courts, voluntary systems, and their competitors that deeply incentivize them towards using the minimal amount of force that's necessary, because the more property damage that is done, the more problems that are caused, the more they're likely to be financially responsible for these things in a way that their competitor wouldn't.
Yeah.
And the IDF can just go, oh, well, we're the big bad bullies in charge, so have fun rebuilding. Or they'll or they'll come help you rebuild with whatever stolen money and NGO profits and charity, etc.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I still don't know that I have the answer to. I get the idea that you're incentivized towards better courses of action. I still don't get this idea though that there's a substantive difference other than a gradient of wrong. If it's wrong to bomb a building after multiple warnings for the people to evacuate the building, right, as a means of getting rid of terrorists, then I can't find the substantive difference other than the scale of damage done, than going in and like throwing grenades into a room before you clear it to kill the terrorist.
So the question at hand here is, are they even allowed to bomb these buildings in the first place? Yes, I could understand if it was like, you know, literally a Hamas like bunker somewhere. It's just built by Hamas. Hamas is just, it's just a Hamas property. then
Mhm.
yeah, you'd be allowed to bomb that. But if they're just in like some apartment building, which is, there are some Hamas people living in there, you wouldn't even be allowed to warn people, hey, get out of that building because we want to destroy it, could destroy the Hamas people. So even just the knock on the door, that
Mhm.
itself is an aggression, right? Because you're not allowed to destroy this building. You're allowed to go in and take out the individual Hamas members, sure, but not destroy the whole building. That people don't. It's not the onus isn't on them to leave and get out of there. They're allowed to be there. You're
But
not allowed to
how is
destroy
that
the whole
how is
thing.
that different than a human hostage? If you have terrorists in your building that are holed up, knowing that the only way that they can be caught is by bombing the building. I mean, you could go in with like special forces, sure, but like you can
Yeah,
only do that. You can only do that so many times before you're incapable of doing that, right? Like the loss of human life on the IDF side gets too high at a certain point, and
and
it's
then they
often
shouldn't do it,
dangerous just to
right?
get into the neighborhood. Yeah.
And
Well, okay,
then they
they
should then
shouldn't
they
do
should
it,
just then they
but
should just
then
let
Hamas
off,
is shooting
and then
rockets at you. You know
but
what I mean?
then they should just let off and let the market take over, and then individual market participants will be,
Yeah,
hey, this individual, like Hamas, eh, they have a installation on top of this apartment building, and they keep firing rockets our way. We're going to take them out, specifically them out, not Hamas as a whole, right?
okay,
Because that's
okay.
unrealistic, apparently,
When you
right?
say let the market take over, right? The only way that makes sense is if you're saying that the Israeli state gives up its monopoly on warfare, and you're saying
Yeah, brilliant.
allow BlackRock and all these other companies to be funded to do warfare. If you mean that, sure, I agree. I do. I think it would be the only right course of action, right? The problem is that it's kind of like what use is that advice when it is simply never going to happen, or maybe not never going to happen, but it's not going to happen in this scenario, right?
It,
Like
it
I can
could
say
happen.
that, okay, but then it's
Like,
like, okay, but what do we do to actively get towards anarchism? I don't know. I don't know. I guess go on that. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it could happen if everybody in the Middle East changed their philosophy to a rational one. Then
Right,
yeah,
right.
the war would be gone in a second, right? It's entirely within the realm of human choice. It's not immutable. And so how do we push ourselves towards that world? By having conversations like this is one way, and
For
by
sure.
actually doing praxis.
But all I'm saying is like when you're saying, well, it could happen in this scenario, it's like it's almost like who's really on board with Cartesian doubt now? Because all the goddamn evidence says it's not. Like every piece of evidence says that the Israeli state's
Right, right,
not
yeah.
going to just give up everything and be like let the military be privatized.
This is a the distinction here is like whether or not it's possible for it to be resolved in this moral way. Like we're trying to derive what the moral way of dealing with this conflict is.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
it is within the capabilities of man to resolve
Mm-hmm.
it in this moral way. So saying that's never going to happen, that isn't an argument against it because it's possible. It literally is possible for it to
Right.
be done in this moral way.
Evidence actually shows it's
It,
possible. I
it's
was mostly just making a
it's
joke.
very it's very unlikely that it will be done in the moral way. I completely agree because they all have this collectivist philosophy, which is why I'm arguing against the collectivism.
Right. So I don't know. It's like then the question becomes how do you I know it's like I hate the pragmatist in me. But it's like, okay, fine. We argue that, but then what? Like, but then do we just kind of sit on the sidelines and go and just constantly say, well, you're crazy and refuse to engage in the discussion of, you know, what is the more appropriate means of it's like I don't know. It's like you're forced to choose between two evil. Like I had this conversation with um Wellspring back before he got all pissy and left and got mad at me, right? And not this conversation about like war, but it was at an individual level, right? And it's kind of this question of what happens when you're forced to choose between two anti-life situations, right? Which is like, I can't swim, or like I'm a bad swimmer or whatever. Like my daughter's drowning, right? And I either can, for whatever reason, however the circumstances are, evidence, everything points to the fact that I can either go in to save my daughter, but I'll die, or I can let my daughter drown. But by letting my daughter drown, this is such an anti-life position for me. Like my life as a is ruined from the guilt and the pain of a dead daughter forever, right? And so it's kind of like neither of these decisions is like a pro-life decision. Saving my daughter and committing suicide is not pro-life, and letting my daughter drown is not pro-life, right? And so the thing then becomes, well, you can't just be crippled by inaction. And I kind of feel the same way when it comes to, in this specific example, but in general, state actors versus other state actors or collectivist actors, right? It's like both of these are I can't hashtag I stand with either of these people. They're both monsters, right? They're both anti-life collectivist monsters that regularly abuse and terrorize people in their lives. And yet I can also recognize that Hamas is a greater threat to order, that they are active terrorists, that they are in some ways, in a weird way, worse. And yet I also am stuck between this rock and hard place where I know that to say that one is worse is really just giving in to a consequentialist garbage. They're both evil. And yet I can recognize that the strategic path towards anarchism is not advocating either for an impossibility and leaving it at that, or advocating that Israel stops going after Hamas. At least in my framework. You might disagree and think, well, the correct advocacy is to demand Israel just stop and open up the borders, and this will solve more problems than going after them. I don't know.
So I think you touch on something interesting here. It's indeed, yeah, you shouldn't be just shrugging your shoulders. Well, what can we do?
Right.
It's sort of like Rothbard's borrowing from the Leninist of adventurism and opportunism, right? Where the adventurous were just we'll completely disassociate from the state apparatus. We're going to have nothing to do with it. We're just on our own path, right? This is a deviation from the correct line, but so is opportunism, where you go too far in the other direction, where you're doing whatever to try and get some institutional support on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
The correct path is in between these two, where
Right.
you acknowledge that states are a thing, right? And you try and use that to your advantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to, you are voting, you're doing things like that. But still, you have to keep in mind, to avoid being an opportunist, you have to keep in mind that the goal is indeed this world of anti-collectivism, of
Right.
individualism. That is the goal that you're pushing towards. Is this moral vision of a zero-state solution, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
what you're pushing towards.
It honestly is such a struggle, man, because everybody else just gets to push this single no issue, everybody else is evil, I'm this version of collectivist ideology, and then I'm sitting here doing everything I can to it's it's so easy for me, I guess I could say it would be so easy for me to just step into the shoes that I see so many libertarians doing on this issue, which is just Israel is bad, they, in quotation marks, a little hint at how the Jews are evil and they control banks or whatever. And and just having this anti-state solution because, as evil as Hamas is, the Palestinian people have no state. Therefore they're the good guys. And this kind of dichotomous thinking, it would just be so much easier, I think, than trying to recognize the history of Israel and the problems, and at the same time being yeah, Israel is evil, and yet Hamas is evil. How do we advocate getting rid of these people that are evil and disassociating power and getting to a pathway to peace? You know what I mean? It almost seems like I'm trying to centrally plan politics when really I should just be sitting here going privatize everything and having no say in the tactics. And yet that feels wrong too, right? I feel like I'm constantly between a rock and a hard place, as you described, between these two strategies.
Yeah, it reminds me of Arthur Holmes' description of the psychological argument for skepticism, where it's a lot easier when your back's up against the wall to say, I don't know, man. I'm a skeptic. I don't know anything. Right? That's a lot
Right.
easier than saying, okay, here's my epistemology and everything. So I suppose there's a similar thing here, the psychological argument for collectivism. It's a lot easier to
Mhm.
say, well, no, this group is bad because X, Y, Z, and therefore I'm for this other group. Right? So
Right.
that's a lot easier than breaking it down in this way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate you talking with me about this because I think, the latter third was, obviously pertinent to today. But I think all of these things are important philosophical questions, the limits of self-defense and how we appropriately determine self-defense. And I knew that I was lacking in my regard. I still think we have a little bit of disagreement in terms of, I still don't know that I have a perfect answer for this. Targeted bombs are collectivists, grenades in rooms aren't. I still don't. That's the only thing I still feel like I wish I had a good answer for. Do you feel like there's something I missed, or that there is a good way to resolve that question? Because I'm not seeing it.
So the difference I was trying to get at there was that it depends on how they're being used. So
Mhm.
the central planner, he leans towards the bombs because he doesn't care about costs. He doesn't have any way to access the costs, right? So
Mhm.
he leans in that direction of just wipe it all out. Whereas the free marketeer, he leans in the direction of laser guns because he does actually have to concern himself with costs. And these are not two like steps on the same ladder. These are distinct things. There is a
Mhm.
distinction in the fact that one does have costs that he can actually calculate, the other does not. It's an unbridgeable gap between them. It's not that one can kind of calculate costs and one kind of can more. It's
Right.
one can, one can't.
Well, so I think I disagree with all of that, actually. I think central planning is bad, because you have one person determining cost, right? And so they're lacking information. But that doesn't mean that central planners can't get lucky, and that capitalists can't get unlucky. It is indeed a fact that given the same exact circumstances, the central planner could get closer to the appropriate price, and that the capitalists could be wrong. It's just that one isn't there. One is incentivized towards doing so and has competition and isn't a single actor, right? And the other has stolen the right of competition and isn't incentivized towards getting accurate cost.
Right, I suppose the difference is the central planner would never know when they're lucky and unlucky, right? They would never have
True.
access.
Fact.
That is the
Absolutely
distinction.
true. Yeah, for sure. They would never know, kind of given, I think there's that, oh God, is it I don't remember who it is that did the video on like the ECP that's really, really good with like the
Learn
train
liberty.
and the Learn Liberty. Thank you. Right. Like the central planner will never know what was better, going through the mountain or going around the mountain. They may guess correctly that going one way or the other was the right answer, and the capitalist could incorrectly gauge, but the capitalist has more information available to them in the market because of prices. They're more likely to get the right answer. And if they get the wrong answer enough times, they go out of business and are replaced by someone that tends to be more accurate. Right.
It's Darwinian in that way. Like the
Yeah.
bad entrepreneurs die off and the good entrepreneurs rise to the top.
For anybody watching that isn't a hardcore libertarian nerd, Learn Liberty's video on the economic calculation problem is like for the dum dums, and I'm not calling you a dum dum. I'm calling myself a dum dum, right? For us that aren't like the Liquid Zulu big brain, where our brain seeps out into our hair. Okay, like that's a great video to like very easily understand the economic calculation
Yeah,
problem.
someone said that their headcanon was that every time I use my autism to notice something, use my pattern recognition to notice something autistically, that my one hair curls a little bit more. That's how it got like
Yeah.
this.
So I guess the other thing that I guess I have an issue with, but we've resolved. I think we've resolved the issue there. Like I think it was more communication than it was actually us disagreeing. Right. I think we agree. Right. The market is obviously better and that it's incentivized in the correct direction. But my other question is, why would the capitalists even have to concern themselves with that cost? If a terrorist is in a building and you blow up the building and the building is being held hostage by the terrorist, it's not the capitalist that is bombing the building that's responsible for the damages to the building. If it's to take out the terrorist, right? And the terrorist is the terrorist organization, the warlord that you're fighting, right? They're the ones financially responsible. They're the aggressor. I'm not aggressing by taking them out and happening to do so with a bomb. And at the same time, we get into this issue of, well, how big of a bomb? How big of a bomb is it before we go all the way down to the individual level between forcibly removing grandma with your hands or poking her with a needle in the arm? Which one becomes the unreasonable? And I feel like it's this like court thing post hoc that the capitalist, I guess, has to guess at. And you're saying they're more likely to be accurate in what was too far because they'll have to pay the cost if they're wrong.
Yeah, so the question at the core there was, why do they have to concern themselves with the cost if they're bombing it to rid themselves of this terrorist? Well, the answer is, well, if there was some innocent person in there who had this insurance firm, and then they bomb this person, suddenly that insurance firm is coming after you, and you're, potentially out of war there with another insurance firm.
Yeah,
and if you bombed a bunch of innocent people, you might have 5 insurance firms coming over your head, and it's like, whoa,
yeah,
okay.
I guess I do want to. I do want to add this as well, right? In terms of the market, and it's things we forget to talk about as libertarians because it's not in theory; it's in pragmatics. But it's also important to understand is that even if the lawsuit is frivolous, right? Like let's say I did everything I could to warn people in that building to get out of the building, right? And that it was absolutely necessary. Like they had a nuclear, like that building was attached to a nuclear silo. Right, and the only available weapon that could take out the nuclear silo that was gonna nuke us was a bomb that would take out this adjacent building, right? And I warned you like 24 hours in advance and like multiple ways, and right, even though I'm 100% correct, and everyone is going to agree that I'm correct, just the fact that you exist and that your insurance firm is likely to come after me because you were injured or killed is a cost in and of itself. Right? Like it is a cost that the more people I involve, even if they're frivolous lawsuits, the more potentially frivolous lawsuits is still a means by which I can go out of business. I don't actually have to do anything wrong to go out of business. I could just be careless in too much collateral damage, even in situations where it's okay, where the coffers are simply drained because I'm constantly having to pay off things to avoid court costs. Which is another thing that is like almost like a hidden metric of dissatisfaction with war that the state doesn't have to pay in a weird way. It's like a hidden, maybe like psychological cost that isn't necessarily unethical, right? But you've pissed off enough people, right? And like and that comes with what might be illegitimate cases, but they still have grounds for a case. You know what I mean? Like there's this other part of the market. I think like I don't know what the right word for it is economically speaking, but there's this part of the market that is like almost like the exact opposite of psychic profit, like psychic loss, or something. You know what I mean? But I know psychic loss isn't the right word, but where the market is determined you are an asshole or that you have not necessarily technically aggressed, but you have pissed off enough people where your profitability is deeply hurt because of that. Right.
Yeah. And you can imagine it the same way as if, the state implements some policy which pisses off a bunch of people. Well, they're not going to stop paying you, right? They're still going to be forced to pay you. So they don't have a good metric. They I mean,
they could lose an election. But like in most
states still in control.
Right, the state's still in control. It's just a different member of the mono party in most political can't. Yeah, I mean, it's still
Yeah.
the state that's in control. Yeah.
Like they do have their own type of evolution where if they don't have favorable public opinion, Hoppe talks about this in his paper,
Mhm.
something about Marxist class analysis. I can't remember the
Yeah.
exact title.
Where,
Where
where he determines that's where he determines that that libertarians are oh god that we are what is it? It's not what did he say? It's not class conscious. It might be class conscious. Anyways,
yeah, we have a high level of class consciousness in Marxian
it was
terms.
something. It was something like that. I'm trying to remember, but it was like, yeah, it was something like that. I'll have to look it up. I apologize.
But
I'm sorry for interrupting.
so it does have its own type of evolution where if it is sufficiently awful that people want to rise against it, then it will go out of favor, right? It will be destroyed.
Right. It's like dog
This is
fucking.
not this. Yeah,
Right.
this is
Like
not
dog
a,
fucking. Dogs don't have rights. You can fuck your dogs, right?
Mhm.
But if everybody finds out that you're fucking dogs, like it's sufficiently disturbing to most people that you're gonna have difficulty finding a job or keeping one once people find out, or like interacting in the community, or like you've incurred this negative cost to basically everything that you do with others, so long as they know that you're a dog fucker.
What I'm getting at is slightly different because in that situation you would have market, feedback that you're doing something untoward. The state doesn't have market feedback, but what they do have is public opinion feedback. Are
Right.
they sufficiently outside of public opinion that people are going to revolt against them? Now, this is going to institute some new state, and that is how they have their own Darwinian mechanism. It's very much slower. It's very much more, coarse than a gross than a market mechanism would be, but it still is some sort of Darwinian mechanism. So I wanted to add that caveat on there because I know there are autists like me out there who
I was
correct.
I was on Twitter talking with someone. I think it was Robin the State. And he was, I think so. I'm like 90% sure. And he was talking about this idea of like, there was a recent debate between two libertarians. And they were talking about, like, kind of like this idea of like what percentage of people need to be libertarian in a society for society to be successful. Is it 100%? Right. And, and I had a lot of conversations about this, and so like, basically, I think there is a certain critical mass of people that need to have a philosophically libertarian position. Maybe not, as I don't, and it's a gradient, right? Because like, if you have 10 philosophers and 100, people that basically understand it, it might be more valuable to have 50 people that kind of understand it for just one more philosopher, and vice versa. It might be better to lose one philosopher for 100 more people that have a basic understanding, right? So there's that. So there's a gradient of how much. And then there is, a certain percentage of people that need not be libertarian for a libertarian society to be successful, right? Like you can have a Marxist, a full-blown communist in your society that is Ancapistan. But if he's the only one, eventually that might become a poison that destroys the society. But at least for the time being, like, he just has to play by the rules, right? Like he has no power to overthrow the society he disagrees with. And so, and I talked about that, and I was like, that number obviously moves, right? Just like price doesn't move, but like the price I'm willing to pay for a good, right, changes based upon how happy I am, how sad I am, how hungry I am, right? Just like, a $2 hot dog stand looks awful when I go into work, but when I come out for my lunch break, all of a sudden I'm willing to pay $2 for a hot dog when I wasn't in the morning because I was in a hurry and I wasn't hungry. The same thing I think is true of like societies, libertarian societies, that a libertarian society is doomed to failure at some unknowable number of people that no longer believe in it. And I said, well, this number moves. I was like, because you don't get a lot of revolutions when people aren't hungry. And I think this is kind of true with the state as well, right? Is that there's a certain critical mass where if enough people don't believe in the state collapses, either because of revolution or simply because of civil disobedience, right? If everyone tomorrow was like, I refuse to pay taxes, there's nothing the state could do, right? Because the state is also made up of people, number one, so they would have zero enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, it's
But
a tiny minority as well.
right, but let's just assume the entirety of this of people that work for the state are the only people that don't that decide they don't want to pay their taxes, right? And they're all gung ho. They still don't have any money, any power. They have nothing. They collapse. And so like I think that feedback thing is kind of true too. It's like that public feedback is fickle and dependent upon the economic circumstances, right? Like right now, you're starting to see conservatives in America saying down with the FBI. You're starting to see them say like, you know, the CDC has been nothing but lying to me. Trust the science, right? You're starting to see this right-wing populism surge, which is a kind of a baby ideology, populism, right? It's an ideology that eventually becomes another ideology, either fascism, communism, or libertarianism, right? It's simply an ideology that says the state isn't my friend currently. And so I do wonder if you would have that same mentality, even with the political persecution of like Trump or like other people and like the vaccines and the lockdowns, if we didn't have any inflation and everybody's wallets was doing really good, I doubt that you would see that same level of like down with the FBI, right? Like I think those things are part of that equation. I know it's totally off topic, but you brought it up and I think it's an interesting topic. So I just figured I'd roll with it.
Yeah, so in Lenin has a quote to this effect. I don't know the exact quote, where it's at some points you're supposed to be speaking German. You're supposed to be acting slowly and, you know, working the political apparatus, getting some institutional support, getting, you know, organizing yourselves and, you know, furthering the message slowly, just building the philosophy among the people and, you know, turning philosophers to your side. And then at certain points there's crisis. That's when you need to act. You need to start speaking French. And then, you know, you if you've built up this base of power from speaking German so long, then you can act in this critical moment. So there is a good example of it.
It's part of his dual power theory, right? That you can't really do anything until you've sufficiently captured the institutions.
Yeah, so there's a good example of this. I'm borrowing this from the Springtime of Nations video on libertarian Leninism, where in 1917 the Bolsheviks were like a tiny, tiny minority within the February government. It was just liberal all around. Like they were nothing, right? But then forces loyal to General Kornilov, who wanted to reinstitute the Tsar, attempted to overthrow the February government and reinstate the monarchy. This gives both danger and opportunity to the Bolsheviks, which Lenin recognized. So the adventurists, those people who are like, we don't care about any of this, we're just going to be, you know, to borrow a phrase from the Neoprags, the most principled people on the boxcar, they are just completely uninterested in anything. They just wanted to continue denouncing the February government and not have any part in the war, right? They just wanted to keep denouncing Kerensky, who is running the February government, and, you know, just do nothing, right? Just stand aloof. The opportunists, they were tempted. The people who like the Prags, like, you know, people like what the fuck is his name? I can't remember his name at the moment. They wanted to, you know, just do whatever it takes to appease the regime. They wanted to fight on Kerensky's behalf, no matter what, right? This probably would have led to some sort of splintering between the adventurists and the opportunists. They would have splintered the movement and destroyed the whole thing. Lenin sidestepped both of these by siding with Kerensky's government and helping him fight the war, but only after Kerensky gives him some very, very serious concessions, like, you know, arming the workers, legalizing peasant takeovers of land estates, etc., etc. Like, it's some really harsh concessions, but
he guaranteed the revolution in the near future instead of splintering. I mean, Lenin for all of his evil was a freaking genius.
Yeah, he could demand these concessions because he had been building up
Mhm.
an organized group which knew how to be, fighters. These people were already organized, and they were enough to flip the war, even though they were a minority. They were enough to flip the war either way. Um, so that just gave him, even though he was a minority, the de facto control over the pro-government forces.
This has been like, it's very interesting because it leads into another thing that is a point of contention I have with the strategy of the Libertarian Party here in the United States, which is, and I would say the Libertarian Party here in the United States has done a lot to gain clout and recognition and power, considering we are a winner take all system, right? Like, you guys in the UK have it way easier, right? Like in that like, UKIP can get like a very small percentage of seats and then still form a coalition and demand like slight concessions, right? Like maybe like one. They haven't ever really.
Well, they got out of the EU.
Right. To be fair, sure, sort of. They sort of got you out of the EU.
Yeah, not totally, but like, it's better.
They won the philosophical fight of getting you out of the EU. Like practically, you've had two prime ministers who have done everything they can to tank that from occurring. But philosophically, you know what I mean? You're not technically in the EU, which is a big victory for sure. But one of the things that really upsets me about the Libertarian Party in this winner take all scenario is they often get mad, or other people get mad, other libertarians get mad when libertarians try and play kingmaker in elections, which to me, I see the Libertarian Party as a vanguard party for a philosophical movement of liberty, right? Mm-hmm. Even if it's not libertarianism per se.
It's not to win.
No, it's to push classical liberalism, libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, minarchism, like that group of limited state, right? Paleo-libertarianism. Obviously, it's not my preferred form of libertarianism, which I think is the only correct libertarianism. I don't think you can call yourself a libertarian and then reject all of the philosophy that from the guy who made it. Like you can't reject Rothbardian
libertarianism. Yeah.
Right. Right. It's like, I don't get that, but whatever. You know what I mean? Like, unless you're like a, libertarian socialist and you're just using the same word. But regardless, one of the things that they did is, like, I remember like a ton of people got mad at Mark Victors in Arizona because he dropped out and endorsed Blake Masters. Mm-hmm. Now, Blake Masters lost. To be clear, I don't want to, I'm on YouTube. I'm going to put this on YouTube. So I have to be very careful about the election in Arizona, where I can provably say that it just so happened to be that all of the conservative areas that tended to vote Republican, the printers were broken in all of those machines. And there have been a lot of investigations and other issues after that. Setting that aside, it doesn't matter whether he lost or won or how. What matters to me is that people were very upset that the Libertarian dropped out. And it's like, Blake Masters, if you saw him, like, he did an interview with Dave Smith, right? He is clearly a post-libertarian. Like, that's what he is. He's a post-lib. He's a Pete Quinones kind of libertarian, right? That is like anti-war, doesn't want to be involved in foreign intervention, but like believes that you need to use the state apparatus to like ensure freedom, etc. You know what I mean? Post-lib. Not my favorite. Very scarily close to fascism as far as I'm concerned. But a lot fucking closer than the Democrat or Republicans ever could be, whilst simultaneously being very aware and well-read in Rothbard and even in Hoppe. And it's like, the idea that like, it just reminds me of that. It's like, dog, we don't need to win elections. We just need 7% of the vote. And that can conceivably drop out and move 4% of the vote to a different candidate. Because once you have that power, you essentially have all the power. Like, if you can determine who wins an election, just because it's not you, like, I don't like, that's the most power. That's more power than being the favored candidate. right? Is the one that gets to choose who wins.
Yeah, so there is the correct strategy in there of use the spoiler effect to choose who wins. The Libertarian Party should be very heavily leaning into, hey, we have this large base,
Right.
this large block of Libertarian voters. We can swing this election whichever way we want. We have the fucking power here. We need concessions. I think my problem with when he dropped out in the Masters race
Is that he
was
didn't
that
get those concessions? Yeah.
yeah, there weren't very much concessions. I had a thread at the time. It might be in my old account or something, where
Mhm.
there
What
were so many
What do you
awful
mean?
things.
Neither of us have been permanently banned multiple times
Yeah.
from social media
Mhm,
websites.
mhm, mhm.
My
Yeah.
my Booker account at Fabian Liberty, you should definitely follow him. Michael Skiskotsky is a very good man, and sounds a lot like me. Anyways,
But yes, so I would have wanted very harsh concessions demanded. You know,
mhm.
I want you to endorse that the Fed should be abolished, and then I will drop out of the race. Something like that. Something
Right.
very like, ooh, I need this block to win. But Jesus, something like
Well, so
that.
two
I
two
want more of
reasons
that.
two reasons I agree with you. Number one, because if you spoil an election, but you're just spoiling it for the person you like, then you're not really exercising that power in any capacity, and therefore it's meaningless. Small caveat: he still lost, so obviously we're not at that point where that actually where we actually have that power, right? I think we need about I would guess from the data I've looked at, we need about 7%. Um, only because it, only because from what I understand, last time I looked at the data, roughly 40% of people that when polled said they wouldn't vote for either candidate no matter what if the libertarian candidate didn't win. So like, when talking about 7%, you're really only talking about like 3%. You know what I mean? And then there are people that like, there is also out of that 60% that's left. I think last I checked, it was like 40% would have voted Democrat and 20% would have voted Republican. Right. So like, even if you drop out and endorse, like there's still, you're really only talking about like maybe 15, 20% of your percentage of the vote that you can reliably push into one candidate or the other.
And this is
By
why
like an endorsement.
we need to build that support by speaking German. We need to build this
Right.
block where we
Yes.
can just swing whatever election we want.
Yes, because I think that's where the real power is. I think that's more power than the Democrats or Republicans, at least in mine. And I would say probably the same thing for you in the UK than like Labour or the Conservative Party, right? Like if a party like UKIP, for example, what's the other Libertarian Party, air quotes, in the UK? I can't remember.
Well, there is the Scottish Libertarian Party.
Yeah, but like those are a bunch of fucking commies that just want independence.
Uh, I think you're
Unless I'm
talking about
thinking about the
the
wrong.
Scottish National Party.
Oh yeah. Sorry, that one. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. No,
I'm an American. My
the Scottish
knowledge of your
Libertarian
politics is yeah.
Scottish Libertarian Party is reasonably libertarian, though they did reject my proposals when I put them in for abolishing central banking and whatnot. So there's room to be improved. But
For
yes,
sure.
you touched on something very interesting. There is that these major parties, they don't actually have any real power. They are
No.
stuck in their lane. They have to do what they have been doing for years. They don't have the
Yep.
power to be changing things at all, right? This is a big theme in the Fountainhead, which anybody watching this on YouTube, you should read the Fountainhead immediately. The whole audiobook is on YouTube for free. Don't tell the Ayn Rand Institute or else they'll remove it, but just read the Fountainhead in some way,
You'll
in
just,
some form.
once they remove it, there'll be another one up. It's fine.
Yeah. So like this is like they don't have the power to do anything. They have to do whatever it is that is preset for
Yeah.
them. But we have the power to say, hey, we want this concession or else you'll lose.
Yeah. Here in America, here in America, I could be a libertarian with like, let's say 8% in the polling, right? Which is not anywhere close to where we are currently. Right. And we've lost a lot of power after we got rid of the Prags. And unfortunately, have you been following Michael Heiss and his candidate and shit? It looks like the Mises caucus here in America imploding from corruption.
Yeah, I've been considering making a second Neo-Prague video, given the apparent failure of the Mises Caucus to do what is necessary. But I would also add the only caveat: I don't think losing Prags is losing any power, because the Prags are just going to wish
Yeah, for
wash
sure.
whatever way the establishment wants. So they
For
want
sure, for
actual
sure.
power.
Yeah. No, they like it's nothing. No, nothing was lost by losing them, right? But
Mhm.
the Mises has not. Mises has failed to take that and push it somewhere better, and instead has devolved into Twitter blocks and bickering and very poorly done
Black
protests with
guns matter.
communists. Yeah, exactly. Like, Maj Touré look, I like Maj Touré. He's based on some things. And the thing I love the most about Maj Touré is that he does instead of speaking. Too many libertarians speak and don't do. And
But he
Maj
does
Touré,
Marxism instead of speaking
well,
Marxism.
yeah, I mean, but he goes into communities and teaches people about gun rights, and he teaches, young men how to, about the
So long as
failures
they're
of
in the
going into
correct
jail.
class.
Yes. I mean, like I said, there are some things I like about him, some things I don't like about him. He is very much a race Marxist and has no idea, even so, that he is, and fancies himself a libertarian whilst being philosophically still leftist. And yet, there are some things I like about him, but for the most part, yeah, I agree with you. Fuck, you got me distracted with Mosh Touré with Black. Oh yeah, but it's like what we should be doing is exactly that. We should be getting everything we can to get 8% of the vote. And then we should be going to the Democrat and the Republican and going to the Republican, like you said, and being like, I want a promise that you will vote to abolish the Fed. You don't got to win. I just want a promise that you will vote for it. And that you will unequivocally say that the Federal Reserve should be abolished. Right. And then we should be going to, the Democrat and saying something similar, or something on policing, right? Going to like one of these maybe we're in a district with like a neoliberal, like, not fond of the commie kind of like, centrist, lefty, and being like, look, I want to promise that you will vote to abolish all of these draconian drug laws. Like, these are things that are something that they might not want to do individually, but wouldn't destroy their political career in any capacity if they made that concession, right? Like, there's not to be lefty Democrats that can vote and openly come out to say we need to abolish the Fed, or we need to like strike all welfare programs and cut Medicaid, right? Like, you can't get elected as a Democrat saying that. But I can make the Republicans state that in order to get our vote, or I can make the Democrats state that they're going to vote actively to abolish drug laws, or or warrantless, no knock warrants, right, or something like that.
And this is a twofold benefit, because then everybody sees this and they say, hey, libertarians, they're the real alternative here. And then we redouble our speaking German. We are even more powerful with every time we do this. It's like,
Right.
hey, these libertarians, they are the alternative. If I don't like these two parties, I go libertarian. This is what
But
we have
that's the
to get
thing.
into.
Simultaneously, while speaking German, if you will, we also simultaneously push the conservatives and the leftists closer to libertarianism.
Mhm.
Like so you're pushing them closer to your position whilst gaining favor and gaining kingmaker status. This idea that we should be like, we're only in an election to win an election, it's fucking stupid. It's just dumb. It's sacrificing all of the power we could have so that we can have this like power on paper, which we never gain. Right? Like, I agree, like in local elections, like going after treasurer or like, executive positions at the local level, because this gets familiarity with the community, and it's good to elect libertarians. I get that. But again, we should be kingmakers, and we should be forcing the institutions slowly to become more libertarian until people just until it becomes three parties and people don't see a huge difference between the three parties. Then we've already won. They all that's left is the conservatives have some dumb holdover stuff, and the lefties have dumb holdover stuff, and then we're sitting there with none of the bad holdover stuff.
Mhm.
That's how you win. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a brilliant conversation.
Yeah. I'm glad that we didn't have a debate on this. I really wanted to test out these limits. I had a lot of fun, and yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think it was very good. I liked this.
I love the car. Well, I liked being able to nerd out a little bit. I'm so used
Mhm.
to going on like a panel and like them getting super mad if like I even discuss anything philosophical, and like
Mhm.
everyone just forcibly maintains a consequentialist framework, and they have no understanding of how problematic that even is.
Mhm.
And then they force you into it, and then it's just like lies and rhetoric, and it gets tiring. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to yell at commies. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But I do
we all love
appreciate
a
the
bit
other
of
side.
blood sports now and then, but
Yeah,
it's
I
also
might
good
do a
to
little
get
too much
a
of it.
real conversation.
Yeah, I might do a little too much of it. Maybe it pushes me a little more to the left. I need my anchor Liquid Zulu to bring me back a little bit. So I
Your
appreciate
compass,
it.
as you said last time.
Yeah, you guys. Well, it's a compass that always points north, even if that north is in the direction of a fucking wall.
Go through the wall.
All right, brother. I appreciate you talking with me. I'll get this out on YouTube soon enough.